Hello guys. Welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash became a frontier brain and his prize was a harem of his strongest rival's girl. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The call of the Arbiter. The roar was a physical thing. A wave of sound that crashed against Ash Ketchum and threatened to sweep him off his feet. It was the collective voice of 100,000 people packed into the Battle Frontier's grand stadium, a testament to a fight that had stretched for nearly an hour and had now, impossibly, come down to this. The air, thick with humidity and the metallic tang of clashing energy, vibrated with their anticipation. Across the cratered battlefield, Palmer stood firm, a faint, proud smile on his face that was equal parts respect and challenge. The last of his formidable team, the Continental Titan Regigigas, loomed over the field, its stony body etched with moss and the scars of 1,000 dormant years. The air around it warped with sheer pressure. And on Ash's side, there was only Pikachu. His small, yellow partner stood on trembling legs, chest heaving, one ear drooping from exhaustion. Sparks fizzled weakly from his red cheeks. They had fought through a gauntlet to get here. Palmer's Rhyperior, his Dragonite, a melodic that had nearly drowned them in a vortex of beautiful, deadly water. Each victory had been earned with a pound of flesh. Now, they were at the absolute limit. "You've done it, kid," Palmer's voice boomed, cutting through the stadium's din. He wasn't using a microphone, he didn't need one. "You've pushed me harder than any challenger in a decade. But this is the end of the road. Regigigas is power absolute." Ash didn't answer. His focus was narrowed to a pinpoint, the roaring crowd. The setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. Even the thumping of his own heart. It was all just white noise. All that mattered was the bond between him and the Pokémon he'd started his journey with. A silent language spoken in the twitch of an ear, the tensing of a muscle. "A little more, buddy," Ash thought, and he felt the sentiment echo back from Pikachu, a defiant surge of loyalty that was stronger than any fatigue. "I know. Just hang on." Regigigas lumbered forward, each step a miniature earthquake. Its ability, slow start, had worn off minutes ago. Now, it was a waking god of destruction, its attack and speed stats no longer halved but unleashed in their full, terrifying glory. It raised a fist the size of a Snorlax. The move was obvious. Hammer arm. Simple, brutal, effective. "Pikachu, agility, now," Ash commanded. There was no wasted motion. Pikachu shot forward. A blur of yellow so fast he seemed to dissolve into pure electricity. The colossal stone fist slammed into the spot where he'd been a microsecond before, and the entire stadium shook. A spiderweb of cracks radiated from the point of impact, kicking up a cloud of dust and rock. "You can't run forever," Palmer yelled, his confidence unshaken. "Crush claw." Regigigas swiped, its massive claws carving deep gouges in the earth. Pikachu weaved, a master of evasion, but he was losing ground. The sheer scale of his opponent was a strategic nightmare. Every attack reshaped the battlefield, creating obstacles, limiting his movement. They were being herded, cornered. Ash saw it. Palmer was using Regigigas's size not as a blunt instrument, but as a cage. A cage whose walls were closing in with every swing. Another hammer arm descended. Into the dust cloud. "Pikachu!" Ash yelled. Pikachu dove into the swirling debris from the last impact. For a moment, he was invisible. Palmer's eyes narrowed, scanning, but it was too late. Now, thunderbolt on the ground. From within the cloud, a brilliant bolt of lightning erupted, not at Regigigas, but straight into the ravaged earth. The ground, already destabilized and damp from Melodic's earlier hydro pumps, became a supercharged conductor. The electricity didn't just shock the surface. It surged through the very rock beneath Regigigas's feet. The Titan roared, not in pain, but in fury, as its massive legs seized for a critical second. It was an old trick, one they'd used 100 times, but against an opponent of this magnitude, it was like throwing a pebble at a mountain. It hadn't done real damage, but it had bought them a second. And a second was all Ash needed. Iron Tail. Aim for the shoulder. Pikachu burst from the dust cloud, his tail glowing with the hard sheen of polished steel. He used the momentum from his agility, rocketing up a slab of upturned earth and launching himself into the air. He spun,
a living discus of electricity and metal, and slammed his tail into the mossy growth on Regigigas's left shoulder.
It was a perfect hit. A solid, resonant clang echoed through the arena. But it did nothing. Pikachu was swatted out of the air like a fly, sent tumbling across the field until he skidded to a halt at Ash's feet, groaning. The crowd let out a collective gasp. A murmur of disappointment rippled through the stands. That was it. That was the final, desperate gambit. Palmer shook his head, a hint of sympathy in his expression. A valiant effort. But its hide is thicker than a fortress wall. It's over.
Ash knelt, placing a hand on Pikachu's back. He felt the rapid, shallow breaths. The little guy was running on fumes. But as Ash touched him, he felt something else. A flicker. A tiny, defiant spark. He looked into Pikachu's eyes and saw it, the same unwavering fire that had been there since Pallet Town.
He smiled. A genuine, confident smile that seemed utterly out of place. He'd seen what he needed to see. The iron tail hadn't been meant to do damage. It was a probe. A test. And it had confirmed his wild, insane, last-ditch theory. He stood up, his gaze locking with Palmer's. It's not over until we say it is. He took a steadying breath. This was it. The whole battle, every move, every feint, every hit they'd taken, had been leading to this single moment. He had been conditioning Palmer, making him believe Ash was focused on Regigigas's stone body, on its overwhelming power. But the real target was something else entirely. Pikachu, Ash said, his voice dropping, calm and clear. Remember the moss? Let's show them what a little gardening can do. Full power. Volt tackle. Pikachu struggled to his feet, but his posture changed. He understood. He crouched, and the air itself seemed to crackle. The weak sparks on his cheeks erupted into a raging storm of golden energy, a torrential aura that cloaked his entire body. He wasn't just a Pokemon anymore, he was a bolt of living lightning. Palmer's eyes widened in confusion. Volt tackle? That's suicide. A direct assault is pointless.
But Ash wasn't aiming for Regigigas's body. Go.
Pikachu shot across the field, faster than the eye could follow. He wasn't a blur. He was a comet, trailing an arc of blinding electricity. Regigigas prepared for the impact, bracing its legs, its arms raising to swat the tiny thread away. Not the chest, Pikachu, Ash roared, pointing. The shoulder. The same spot as before, aim for the moss. The realization dawned on Palmer a fraction of a second too late. His jaw dropped. The moss. The ancient, damp flora growing in the crevices of Regigigas's stone form. The same moss Ash had made sure to drench with Melodic's water earlier in the fight. The same moss he'd just struck with a metallic iron tail to ensure a perfect point of conduction. It wasn't a fortress wall, it was a lightning rod. Pikachu slammed into the patch of green on Regigigas's shoulder.
The Volt Tackle's recoil damage was immense, sending a pained shriek from Pikachu, but the primary charge didn't harmlessly dissipate across the Titan's stone hide. Instead, 100 million volts of electricity found their path of least resistance. The superconductive, waterlogged moss channeled the entire, unrestrained force of the attack inside Regigigas, bypassing its outer defenses and shocking its internal systems directly. Regigigas froze. The yellow lights in its eyes flickered violently, like dying stars. It let out a groaning, grinding roar that was not of fury, but of system failure. For a long moment, it stood perfectly still, a silent colossus. Then, with the slow, inevitable finality of a falling mountain, it began to tip. It crashed onto its back with a sound that shook the very foundations of the stadium, sending a tidal wave of dust and air blasting across the field.
Silence. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the 100,000 spectators. They stared at the fallen giant, at the tiny yellow mouse panting heavily on the ground, and at the young man standing tall, his hat casting a shadow over his determined eyes. Then, the referee, who looked as shocked as everyone else, slowly raised his flag. Regigigas is unable to battle. Pikachu is the winner. Which means the victory goes to the challenger, Ash Ketchum. The silence shattered. The roar that followed was 10 times louder than before, a deafening explosion of disbelief and adoration. Scott, the Frontier owner, was literally jumping on the announcer's table, screaming with joy. Ash walked calmly onto the field and scooped up his partner. "You did it, buddy," he whispered, holding Pikachu close. "I knew you could." Pikachu managed a weak, Pika, before nuzzling into his trainer's chest, the last of his energy spent. As Palmer recalled his fainted Pokémon, he walked across the ruined landscape to meet Ash, his hand extended. The proud smile was back, but now it was tinged with awe. In all my years, I have never seen anything like that. You didn't fight its strength. You fought its very nature. You saw a weakness that wasn't even there. That was the work of a true master. Ash shook his hand, a grin finally breaking across his face. Thanks, Palmer. You're the toughest opponent we've ever faced. The celebration was in full swing. The lights of the stadium flashed, music began to blare, and the crowd was chanting his name. This was it. The culmination of a long, arduous journey. He had conquered the battle frontier. He was a champion.
And then the world broke. It started not with a sound, but with a feeling. A low, gut-wrenching vibration that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The stadium's triumphant music stuttered and died. The flashing lights flickered and went out, plunging the arena into the twilight gloom of the setting sun. The roar of the crowd choked into a collective gasp of confusion and fear.
A tremor shook the stadium, stronger this time. It wasn't an earthquake. Earthquakes were chaotic, messy things. This was different. It was rhythmic, deliberate. A deep, resonant thrum that felt ancient and impossibly powerful. Cracks didn't just appear in the concrete. They glowed with a soft, golden light. Panic began to set in. People were screaming, starting to run for the exits. What's going on? Scott yelled, grabbing a railing to steady himself. Ash held Pikachu tighter, his eyes scanning the sky. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy that made the hair on his arms stand on end. It felt like the moments before a legendary Pokémon revealed itself, but amplified 1,000 times over. This wasn't Dialga, or Palkia, or Giratina. This was something else. Something primordial. Directly above the center of the stadium, the violet sky began to tear open. It didn't rip or shred. It peeled back like a fine silk curtain, revealing a swirling vortex of pure, blinding golden light behind it. The light wasn't harsh or searing. It was warm, serene, and utterly terrifying in its silent, overwhelming power.
From the heart of the vortex, a figure emerged. It descended slowly, its hooves touching the ravaged battlefield with impossible grace. It was a Xerneas, its majestic antlers glowing with the colors of the aurora borealis, its eyes holding the wisdom of millennia. But this was no mere wild legendary. It carried itself with an air of purpose, of regality. It was not an animal, it was an envoy.
The moment its hooves touched the ground, the shaking stopped. A wave of profound calm washed over the stadium, silencing the screams, stilling the panic. Every person, every Pokémon, was held rapt, their gaze fixed on the divine creature standing in the center of the arena. Then, a voice echoed, not through the air, but inside every mind at once. It was a voice of 1,000 harmonious tones, ancient and yet perfectly clear. Less than be still. Greater than Ash felt the words resonate in his very soul. He stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had encountered legends, stood before gods, but this was different. This was an audience. The Xerneas turned its magnificent head, its gaze sweeping over the crowd before settling on Ash. Its eyes, deep pools of cosmic blue, seemed to see right through him, weighing his past, his present, his potential. Less than for generations, this island, this frontier, has served a hidden purpose. It is more than a challenge of strength. It is a crucible, designed to identify a mortal of unparalleled will, of unbreakable spirit, of a heart pure enough to resonate with the world itself. A trial to find the one destined to become the warden of the seal. Greater than.
The voice paused, letting the weight of its words settle. Warden of the seal. Ash's mind raced, but he found nothing. It was a title that meant nothing to him.
Less than a threat is rising, greater than the voice continued, a new, graver tone entering the symphony. Less than not a creature of rage or territorial instinct, but a silence. A creeping void that seeks to sever the bonds between the world of man and the world of legend. Should it succeed, both realms will wither and die. A new guardian is required. Greater than. The Xerneas took a step towards Ash. A beam of soft, golden light shone down from the portal above, enveloping him. It was warm, and it felt like it was scanning him, not just his body, but his aura, his very soul. Less than Ash Ketchum. You have been tested. You have been weighed. And you have been chosen. Greater than greater than. Before Ash could process the declaration, before he could even form a question, the herald spoke again. Less than your victory has earned you a great reward. Not a title to be held, nor a trophy to be displayed. You are granted a bond, the likes of which this world has not seen for 1,000 years. To be a warden is not to stand alone. You shall be supported by the pillars of your generation, the strongest souls whose destinies are now intertwined with yours. They're your prize, and you are theirs. Greater than greater than.
Prize. Pillars. Ash's mind reeled with confusion and a rising sense of alarm. This was moving too fast. He had no say in this.
Wait. He tried to call out, but his voice was a whisper, lost in the overwhelming presence of the creature before him. Less than behold, warden. Your pillars. Greater than as if on cue, 3 more beams of light, stark white and brutally fast, slammed into the arena around him. They struck the ground with explosive force, kicking up clouds of dust. When the light faded, 3 figures stood where there was nothing before. On his left stood a woman with impossibly long blonde hair, dressed in a sophisticated black coat. Her gray eyes, sharp and analytical, were wide with shock, her hand frozen midway to a bookshelf that wasn't there. A Garchomp materialized beside her a second later, roaring in confusion and immediately placing itself between her and the Xerneas. It was Cynthia, the champion of the Sinnoh region. On his right, a younger woman with a wild mane of purple hair appeared, her expression a mask of feral fury. She was crouched in a battle stance, her hands balled into fists, her body radiating an untamed energy. Her Haxorus appeared a moment after, its axe-like tusks gleaming dangerously. Iris, the champion of Unova.
And directly in front of him, a third figure stood. She had short, gray hair and an expression of cold, disciplined shock. She was dressed in a simple white and black karate gi, her muscular arms tensed, her body a coiled spring of lethal potential. She didn't summon a Pokemon. She looked ready to fight them all herself. B, the fighting-type prodigy from Galar.
They were all there. 3 of the most powerful trainers he had ever known or heard of, ripped from wherever they were and deposited in the middle of the ruined stadium. They looked at their new surroundings, at each other, and then at Ash, their expressions a mixture of confusion, outrage, and immediate suspicion. What is the meaning of this? Cynthia demanded, her voice calm but laced with steel. Her Garchomp growled in agreement. Who are you? Iris snarled, her eyes darting between Ash and the Xerneas. What have you done? B said nothing. Her piercing gaze was fixed on Ash, a silent, burning question in her eyes. Before Ash could even attempt an answer, the Xerneas raised its head. Less than the bond must be forged. The hour is late. Greater than. Bond. What bond? Cynthia took a step back, her strategic mind clearly racing to find a way out of a situation she couldn't comprehend. But there was no escape. The Xerneas' antlers flared with brilliant, rainbow-colored light. 4 tendrils of pure energy, 1 for each color of the aurora, shot out and struck each of them in the chest. It wasn't painful. It was infinitely worse. Ash's world dissolved into a maelstrom of light, sound, and raw, unfiltered sensation. He was no longer just himself. He felt a sudden, invasive surge of analytical calm, a mind that processed the event not with fear but with a detached, academic curiosity. Cynthia. He was rocked by a wave of wild, untamed fury and a fierce, possessive love for dragonkind. Iris. He felt a rigid, unyielding discipline, the burn of 1,000 hours of training, and a quiet, simmering frustration at this sudden loss of control. B. He felt their shock, their anger, their confusion, as if it were his own, and through the chaotic link, he knew they were feeling his own bewildered terror in return. Their minds, their very essences, were being forcibly slammed together. He saw flashes of their lives. Cynthia poring over ancient texts in a dusty library. Iris laughing as she swung on a vine in the heart of a deep forest. B delivering a perfect, shattering blow to a stack of concrete blocks. He heard their thoughts, jumbled and panicked, crashing into his own. What is this? An psychic attack? Cynthia's mind screamed, already trying to analyze the phenomenon. Get out of my head, Iris raged, a mental roar that felt like a physical blow. B's thoughts were not words, but a silent, focused wall of pure, defiant will, a mental barrier trying to fight off the intrusion.
The process lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. When it was over, the tendrils of light receded. The four of them were left standing in the arena, panting, their hands on their heads. The connection was still there. It wasn't a flood anymore. It was a low, constant hum at the back of his mind. A thin, unbreakable wire that now connected the four of them. He could feel their presence, a faint echo of their emotions, their very beings, now permanently linked to his.
He looked at them. Cynthia's cool composure was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, intellectual horror. Iris was glaring at him, her eyes promising murder. Bee's fists were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. They weren't his allies. They were his prisoners, and he was theirs. The crowd was utterly silent, witnessing a divine ritual they could not possibly understand. On one of the few remaining functional jumbo screens, which had been showing a replay of Pikachu's final attack, the feed suddenly switched. A panicked news anchor appeared, the chyron at the bottom of the screen reading, "Breaking news. We are getting baffling reports from the Sinnoh region," the anchor said, her voice strained. "An unprecedented and localized seismic event has been detected near Lake Acuity. Sources say the lake itself appears to be draining. Geological survey teams are being dispatched, but they are currently unable to approach due to an unexplained energy field."
The report went unheard by the four trainers in the center of the stadium. They were too lost in their own shared nightmare. The Xerneas, its task complete, dipped its head. Less than the seal is bound. The pillars are set. Your path begins now, Warden. Do not fail. The fate of all worlds rests upon you. Greater than.
With a final, lingering look at Ash, the herald of the gods dissolved into a shower of golden light, which then retracted back into the vortex in the sky. The portal sealed itself, leaving behind the quiet, star-dusted sky of early evening.
They were alone. The four of them, bound together by a force beyond their understanding, standing in the wreckage of what was meant to be Ash's greatest triumph. He looked at the faces of the three powerful women now tethered to his soul. He didn't see partners. He saw fury. He saw violation. He saw rivals who had just been handed their greatest enemy. And in the silent, humming space that now connected their minds, Ash felt their first, unified thought, directed squarely at him.
You will pay for this. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Unwilling Alliance.
The chaotic roar of the stadium, the panicked faces, the shimmering night sky, it all dissolved into a nauseating, dimensionless void. For a terrifying instant, there was no up or down, no sound, no sensation other than a violent, wrenching pull at the very center of his being. Ash gritted his teeth, instinctively shielding Pikachu, as the world was torn away and reassembled around them with the disorienting finality of a closing shutter.
One moment, they were on a battlefield. The next, they stood on cool, polished stone under a sky that was not their own. They were in a vast, open-air temple. Graceful, arching structures of pale gray stone and dark, almost black wood reached towards a celestial dome that swirled with a gentle, mesmerizing nebula of silver and indigo. It was night, but a soft, ambient light emanated from the star-dusted sky and from intricate patterns carved into the floor, bathing the entire complex in a serene twilight. In the center of the grand courtyard was a placid, circular pool, its water so still it perfectly reflected the cosmic display above. The air was clean, cool, and carried the faint, clean scent of ancient stone and something else, something indescribably old and powerful.
It was familiar. He recognized the architectural fusion of Johto and Sinnoh, the distinct feel of the place. It was the Sinjo ruins, but not the crumbling, weather-beaten historical site he'd visited once before. This was a vision of the ruins in their prime, or perhaps something else entirely, a sanctuary remade, a haven outside of normal space.
The relative peace lasted for precisely 3 seconds. Haxorus, let's go, outrage. The command was a raw, furious scream. Iris didn't wait for an explanation. She didn't analyze the situation. She reacted. Her Pokeball snapped open, and the towering Axe-Jaw Pokemon materialized with a deafening roar that shattered the temple's tranquility. Its eyes glowed a furious red, its body crackled with draconic energy, and it immediately charged, not at a person, but at one of the arching temple walls, clearly intending to smash its way out of their new prison. Stop. Cynthia's voice was sharp and commanding, cutting through Iris's rage. We don't know where we are. Acting recklessly could be disastrous. Haxorus ignored her, its tusks poised to shatter the ancient stone.
Pikachu, you're up, Ash said, his voice level. He set his partner down. There was no command, no shouted attack. Pikachu simply darted in front of the raging dragon, a tiny yellow sentinel against a mountain of muscle and scale. He didn't spark or prepare an attack. He just stood there, his gaze locked on Haxorus, his posture radiating a quiet, unshakable resolve that spoke of 1,000 battles fought and won.
The effect was instantaneous. Haxorus, caught in the throes of outrage, skidded to a halt just feet from Pikachu, its draconic fury faltering in the face of such absolute, defiant stillness. It roared again, more in confusion than in anger, shaking its massive head as if to clear it. Iris stared, her fists clenched. "Get your mouse out of my Haxorus's way," she snarled, though some of the fire had left her voice. She was a master of dragons. She could feel her Pokemon's hesitation, its sudden unwillingness to attack. "He's not in his way," Ash replied, his eyes still fixed on her. "He's just asking him to think for a second. Something you should try." Iris's eyes narrowed into slits. He is right, Iris," Cynthia interjected, stepping forward.
Her Garchomp moved with her, a silent, menacing shadow. She wasn't looking at Ash or Iris, but at the temple itself, her sharp intellect working at a furious pace. "This place, it is not of our world. Look at the sky. Those are not our constellations. The stone itself, it feels both ancient and brand new. To attack it would be like attacking the wall of our cage without knowing if the zookeeper is holding a stake or a shotgun."
Her analogy was stark, but it got the point across. Iris shot a final, venomous glare at Ash before recalling her Haxorus, the red light of the Pokeball seeming to swallow its frustrated roar. The silence that fell afterwards was heavy and thick with hostility.
And then the third pillar made her move. Bee had been silent the entire time, her disciplined mind processing the violation of the bond, the forced teleportation, and the architecture of their new prison with a chilling stoicism. Now, she moved. Her steps were silent, deliberate, as she walked across the courtyard and stopped directly in front of Ash. She was shorter than him, but she carried herself with a density of presence that made her seem to take up more space.
She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, did the talking. They held no heat, no explosive anger like Iris's. They were cold, analytical, and utterly unforgiving. They were issuing a challenge that had nothing to do with Pokemon. It was a raw, physical assessment of his worth. "You are the center of this chaos," her gaze said. "You are the one this entity called Warden. Prove to me you are not just some child who stumbled into a god's favor. Show me you have the will to stand here." Ash met her stare without flinching. He didn't puff out his chest or adopt a tough guy's stance. He simply stood his ground, his posture relaxed but rooted, his own gaze steady. He let her see into him, his confusion, his anger at their shared predicament, but also his resolve. He wouldn't be intimidated. He wouldn't be broken. He was as much a victim in this as they were, but he would not let that be an excuse for weakness. Seconds stretched into a minute. The silent battle of wills was more intense than any Pokemon battle. Pikachu stood beside Ash, a tiny mirror of his trainer's determination. Iris watched with a contemptuous scowl, while Cynthia observed with a calculating, detached interest, as if they were two new species of Pokemon she was studying for the first time. Finally, Bee gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. She had seen what she needed to. She hadn't found a master or a god. She had found a fighter. It wasn't acceptance, not by a long shot. But it was a stay of execution. She stepped back, her posture returning to a neutral, at ease stance, though her eyes never lost their sharp, critical edge. One crisis averted. Two more simmering. Ash let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He turned his attention to the group, the de facto leader of a team that hated his guts. "Okay," he started, his voice resonating with a calm authority he didn't entirely feel. "Here's what I know. Not much more than you. We won the battle frontier. Some divine messenger calling itself a Xerneas showed up, called me a warden, and said we were all pillars. Then it zapped us with that light and threw us here." He ran a hand through his perpetually messy black hair. "That's it. That's everything I've got."
Cynthia crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "A Xerneas? The very embodiment of life. You expect us to believe that a being of that stature would simply appear, force this mental violation upon us, and name you a warden without any context or explanation.
I don't expect you to believe anything, Ash countered, his tone hardening slightly. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm just telling you what happened. You were there, you saw it. He gestured around the temple. Does this look like something Team Rocket could pull off? The mention of the bumbling criminal organization was so incongruous with the sublime, cosmic beauty around them that it almost sounded absurd. It did, however, land its point. This was power on a scale they had rarely encountered. So what now, Warden? Iris sneered, spitting the title like a curse. Do we just sit here in this pre-cage you got us all thrown into? Are we supposed to be your prize? Your harem of champions? The word, harem, hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Ash felt a flash of anger, but he suppressed it. She was baiting him, lashing out from a place of fear and fury. He wouldn't take it.
No one is a prize, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. And no one is in a cage they don't choose to be in. I didn't ask for this. I don't want this bond any more than you do. He looked at each of them in turn, letting them see the sincerity in his eyes. But we're in it, together. And lashing out at each other isn't going to solve anything.
Just as he finished the sentence, a wave of dizziness washed over him. The serene temple around him flickered, and for a split second, he tasted something utterly alien. The delicate, slightly bitter flavor of a rare, expertly brewed herbal tea, accompanied by the scent of old paper and leather. It was a fleeting, disorienting sensation, and it was gone as quickly as it came. He stumbled back a step, blinking. Across the courtyard, Cynthia's hand flew to her temple, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. For an instant, she had felt the exhilarating rush of wind, the smell of ozone, and an overwhelming feeling of affection for a small, electric creature. The memory wasn't hers, but the feeling was undeniably real. Iris and Bee flinched at the same time. Iris got a phantom sensation of calloused knuckles against splintered wood, the satisfying ache of a perfectly executed punch. Bee was hit with the humid, earthy smell of a deep, dark forest and the thrill of swinging from a thick vine high above the ground. They all stared at each other, a new, dawning horror in their eyes. The bond wasn't just a hum in the background. It was a two-way street. A leaky faucet of shared senses, memories, and emotions. The violation had just gotten 1,000 times more intimate. What was that? Iris breathed, her anger momentarily replaced by a deep-seated unease.
The bond, Cynthia said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at Ash, her analytical mind piecing it together. It's not just a connection. It's a shared consciousness. We're feeling each other's experiences. She looked horrified. The sanctity of her mind, her most prized possession, had been breached.
This was the breaking point. Ash saw it in their faces. In another minute, the fragile truce would shatter completely. He had to give them something. A purpose. An out. He thought back to the last thing he'd seen before being teleported. The news report. The disturbance at Lake Acuity. I have a plan, he announced, his voice pulling their attention back to him. It's a long shot, but it's better than tearing each other apart.
He waited until all three of them were focused on him. The news report, right before we were taken. It said there was a seismic event at Lake Acuity in Sinnoh. That an energy field was preventing anyone from getting close. He looked directly at Cynthia. Lake Acuity. That's the home of Yuxi, isn't it? The being of knowledge.
Cynthia's eyes widened slightly. He had her attention. It is, she confirmed. That Xerneas mentioned a threat, Ash continued, the pieces clicking into place. A silence that wants to sever the bond between our worlds. What if it started there? What if this has something to do with the Lake Guardians? He laid out his proposal, his voice clear and decisive. So here's the deal. We find a way out of here, and we go to Lake Acuity. All of us. We investigate that energy field. If we get there and it's nothing, a natural phenomenon, a false alarm, whatever, then our priority becomes finding a way to break this bond. We go our separate ways, and this nightmare is over.
He paused, letting that sink in. He was offering them the one thing they all wanted, an escape.
But, he continued, his tone growing more serious, if we get there and the threat is real, if one of the legendary guardians is in danger, then we stay. We fight. We honor the one thing that brought us together, whether we like it or not. The duty to protect the world. He looked at Cynthia and Iris. You're champions. You know that duty better than anyone. He looked at B. And you're a warrior. You don't back down from a real fight. It was a brilliant gambit. He hadn't given them an order. He'd given them a choice, framing it in the language of their own codes of honor. He validated their desire to be free while simultaneously challenging their sense of responsibility. Iris was the first to speak, her scowl softening into a grudging smirk. A real fight, huh? Fine. I'll play along. But if this turns out to be a waste of my time, Warden, I'm coming after you. Bond or no bond. B gave another curt nod. The logic was sound. A mission, a purpose, was preferable to this aimless hostility. It was a clear path forward. All eyes turned to Cynthia. She was the intellectual center of their unwilling group, the one least likely to be swayed by appeals to battle or duty alone. She studied Ash's face for a long moment, her mind weighing every angle, every possible outcome. Your logic is sound, she conceded finally, her voice betraying a hint of reluctant admiration. An unsubstantiated threat is a hypothesis. An endangered legendary Pokémon is a fact. We will proceed with your plan. First, however, we must determine how to leave this place.
As if in answer to her words, the still water in the central pool began to ripple. The reflection of the nebula above swirled and distorted, the light coalescing into a single, shimmering point. A portal. It shimmered, a vertical slice of swirling silver energy, showing a distorted, fisheye view of a snowy, pine-filled landscape on the other side.
They stared at it, speechless. Well, Ash said with a wry grin. I guess that solves that problem. Lake Acuity, I presume? The transition through the portal was as seamless as the first had been violent. One step through the shimmering energy, and they were standing on the frozen, snow-covered shore of a massive lake, the biting cold of Sinnoh's northern climate a shocking contrast to the temple's serene twilight. The air was unnaturally still. There was no birdsong, no rustle of starly in the trees, no splash of a weasel in the water. The silence was a heavy, oppressive blanket. Before them, Lake Acuity was a disaster. The water level was drastically lower, revealing muddy, frozen banks that should have been submerged. In the center of the lake, where the entrance to Yuxi's cave lay, the water roiled and churned around a shimmering, semi-transparent dome of black and purple energy. It crackled with a power that felt utterly alien, a technological corruption of the natural world. By the gods, Cynthia breathed, her hand going to her mouth. This was her home region. This was a sacred site. And it was being desecrated.
Scattered around the perimeter of the energy field were signs of a battle. The snow was churned up, marked by the scorches of Pokémon attacks. And lying in the snow were several figures, rangers and researchers, by the look of their uniforms. Unconscious.
The four of them rushed forward. Ash and Iris began checking the fallen people while Cynthia and Bee examined the scene. They're alive, Ash called out, checking the pulse of a young female researcher. But they're out cold. Looks like some kind of psychic feedback.
Bee knelt, touching the edge of a scorched crater in the snow. Multiple energy signatures. Electric, fire, but they're faint. The fight was one-sided. She then pointed to a set of tracks. They weren't from a Pokémon, nor from a standard human boot. They were precise, geometric, the tracks of something mechanical.
Nearby, half buried in a snowdrift, was the source. It was a sleek, black drone, shaped like a metallic insect. It was shattered, clearly a casualty of the battle, but its design was unlike anything Ash had ever seen. It was seamless, built from a matte black alloy that seemed to absorb the light. There was no corporate logo, no branding. It was sterile, efficient, and unnervingly advanced. This technology, Cynthia murmured, her eyes wide with a scholar's horror. It's not from any known manufacturer. The energy signature from this field, it's designed to disrupt psychic waves. It's a cage. A technological cage built specifically to contain a psychic legendary. The implications were chilling. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a planned, deliberate, and technologically sophisticated operation. Their attention was drawn back to the lake. The crackling energy field flickered and died, the dome collapsing in on itself with a low hum, as if its power source had been depleted or switched off. The unnatural churning of the water ceased. The oppressive silence grew even deeper.
They knew what they had to do. With a shared, unspoken understanding, They summoned their Pokemon. Ash's Pikachu leapt onto his shoulder, Cynthia's Garchomp took a protective stance, Iris released her powerful Dragonite, and Bee called forth her disciplined Graploct.
They made their way to the center of the lake, the ice cracking under their weight. The entrance to Yuxi's cave was exposed, the water level now low enough to walk right in. The air grew colder, heavier, as they descended into the darkness. The cave was empty. The central chamber, where the being of knowledge should have been meditating in a pool of pure energy, was barren. The psychic aura that should have saturated the very stones, a feeling of immense wisdom and peace, was gone. All that remained was a faint, lingering scent of ozone and the cold, dead feeling of absence. The threat was real. They had failed to protect it. Cynthia sank to her knees, her hand touching the cold stone where a god was supposed to be. The academic horror she'd felt outside had morphed into a profound, personal failure. They took it, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. They came to a sacred place of my region, and they stole a piece of its soul. Iris stared into the empty cavern, her earlier rage now forged into a cold, hard diamond of fury. This was a violation on a scale she could understand. Bee's hands were clenched into fists, her stoic expression a mask for the warrior's indignation she felt. To attack a sleeping, peaceful guardian was an act of cowardice.
Ash stood in the center of the cave, the weight of the Xerneas' words crashing down on him. A silence. A creeping void. This was it. It wasn't a theory anymore. It was a desecrated shrine, a missing god, and a group of unknown enemies with terrifying technology and a clear, horrifying goal. His proposal had led them here. His terms were met, and in the dark, empty cave, a silent, unwilling alliance was forged not by a divine proclamation, but by a shared, burning purpose. They would find Yuxi, and they would make whoever did this pay. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. First Contact. The climb back out of Yuxi's cave was a slow, grim procession. The cold air of the surface bit at them, but it was nothing compared to the chill that had settled deep in their bones. The desecrated shrine, the palpable absence of a legendary being, had transformed their unwilling alliance into a fragile, volatile instrument of shared purpose. Anger was the whetstone that was beginning to sharpen them. As they emerged onto the frozen lake shore, the unnatural silence of the area was the first thing Ash noticed. It wasn't just quiet, it was a void. No wind, no distant bird calls, no sense of life. His years in the wild had honed his senses, and every one of them was screaming that they were not alone. Hold on, he said, his voice low. He held up a hand, and the group froze, their own instincts kicking in. Pikachu's ears twitched, swiveling like radar dishes. Garchomp let out a low, guttural growl, its gaze fixed on the dense line of snow-dusted pine trees at the edge of the lake. A faint, high-frequency hum began to permeate the air, a sound so high-pitched it was felt more than heard, a pressure building behind the eyes. What is that? Iris whispered, her hand tightening on a Pokeball at her belt. Cynthia's eyes narrowed, her analytical gaze sweeping the area. It's the energy field. Or something like it. It's activating again. As she spoke, the air between them and the forest began to shimmer, like a heat haze rising from a frozen landscape. From the shadows of the trees, figures emerged. There were a dozen of them, dressed in sleek, form-fitting black uniforms that seemed to drink the ambient light. They wore helmets with opaque visors, hiding any trace of humanity, and carried sophisticated, rifle-like devices. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency, fanning out to form a perfect semicircle, cutting off any escape. Behind them, a woman stepped into the clearing. She wore a similar uniform, but hers was accented with subtle gray lines and she wore no helmet. Her hair was short, silver, and cut with military precision. Her face was sharp, angular, and her expression was one of detached, professional assessment. She looked at the four powerful trainers and their Pokemon not as a threat, but as an unexpected variable in a mission parameter. Target confirmed, she said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion, speaking into a comms unit on her collar. The anomalies from the stadium. It seems the Herald's ritual was successful. She lowered her hand, her cold, gray eyes sweeping over them. You are trespassing in a restricted Aegis Foundation operational zone. Surrender your Pokemon and submit for processing. Aegis Foundation. The name meant nothing to them, but the arrogance in her tone was unmistakable. Who do you think you are? Iris shot back, her voice dripping with venom. You're the ones who will be surrendering. Dragonite, use. She never finished the command. The woman, the commander, raised a single, gloved finger. Activate the null field. Her soldiers raised their rifles, but they didn't fire a projectile. The devices on their barrels began to glow with the same unsettling purple-black energy as the dome that had covered the lake. The shimmering in the air intensified, coalescing into a tangible, visible wave of distortion that swept towards them. The effect was immediate and crippling. Ash felt a wave of nausea, and Pikachu cried out, the sparks on his cheeks fizzling and dying like damp fireworks. Dragonite, who had been building a charge for a hyper beam, let out a grunt of effort, the ball of energy at its mouth sputtering and dissolving into nothing. Garchomp staggered, shaking its head as if fighting off a sudden, debilitating illness. It felt like the air itself had turned to lead, a crushing pressure that sought to suffocate their Pokemon's innate power. What's happening? Ash grunted, fighting the disorienting pressure. It's a suppression field. Cynthia realized, her voice tight with strain. It's interfering with the energy that connects us to our Pokeballs, and it's actively draining the Pokemon's abilities. They're fighting at a fraction of their strength. Clever, the commander, Kestrel, noted with clinical detachment. You grasp the tactical situation quickly. It makes no difference. Your power is irrelevant here. We are the future. Your age of gods and monsters is over. Her soldiers advanced, their rifles now aimed to fire. This wasn't a Pokemon battle. It was an execution. But Kestrel had made a critical miscalculation. She had assumed that stripping them of their Pokemon's full power would render them helpless. She had not accounted for the fact that she was facing two champions, a Galar fighting prodigy, and a boy who had stood against gods. They were not just trainers. They were warriors. Forget ranged attacks. Ash yelled, his mind racing. We have to get in close. Break their formation. It was a desperate, almost suicidal plan, but it was the only one they had. Iris, straight ahead. Be the hammer. Ash commanded. For a split second, Iris looked ready to argue, to defy his order. But she saw the cold certainty in his eyes, felt the desperate logic of the plan, and her battle instincts took over. A feral grin split her face. Finally, some fun. Dragonite, plow through them. Her Dragonite, though weakened, was still a physical powerhouse. With a roar of defiance, it lowered its head and charged, not with a fancy move, but with the raw, unstoppable momentum of a runaway freight train. It slammed into the center of the Aegis line, sending two soldiers flying with the sheer force of the impact. The formation was broken. Cynthia, the ground. We need chaos. Cynthia didn't need to be told twice. Garchomp, dig. Create fissures. Don't let them get a footing. Garchomp dove into the frozen earth with a powerful swipe of its claws. The ground beneath the Aegis soldiers erupted. Trenches opened up without warning, sending soldiers stumbling, their coordinated advance shattering into a panicked scramble. One soldier tried to aim at the subterranean threat, only for Garchomp to burst from the snow right beneath him, sending him flying before disappearing back into the earth. It was a masterpiece of strategic disruption. You and I are on cleanup. Ash shouted. He glanced at her, seeing a dangerous light in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. She was in her element. Lucario, let's go. B didn't need a command. She was already moving, a blur of white and black against the snow. Her Graplock shot forward, its tentacles a fluid, confusing storm of motion. One soldier aimed his rifle, but a blue tentacle shot out, wrapping around the weapon and yanking it from his grasp. Before he could draw a sidearm, Graplock's other tentacles had him ensnared in an unbreakable octolock. B herself was even more devastating. She flowed between the disorganized soldiers like water. A precise chop to a wrist sent a rifle spinning away. A swift kick to the back of a knee brought a soldier down. A palm heel strike to the chest of another sent him gasping into the snow. She wasn't trying to kill them. She was disabling them with a terrifying, beautiful efficiency. Ash and Lucario moved in perfect sync. Ash wasn't a martial artist like B, but he was agile and a veteran of 100 dangerous situations. He drew the soldiers' fire while Lucario, moving with an aura-infused grace that seemed to lessen the null field's effect, struck from their blind spots. A bone rush disarmed one soldier, a quick force palm stunned another. And through it all, Ash felt something new. A faint, blue-white light began to shimmer around his body, invisible to most, but keenly felt by the three women now linked to his soul. It was his aura, awakened and amplified by the Warden's bond. It wasn't an attack. It was a buffer. It pushed back against the oppressive weight of the null field, not negating it, but creating a small pocket of resistance around his allies. Through the bond, they felt it. A slight lessening of the pressure. A trickle of strength returning to their Pokémon. It was the difference between fighting through mud and fighting through water. It was enough. The tide of the battle turned. The Aegis soldiers, so confident in their technological superiority, were being systematically dismantled by a combination of brute force, strategic chaos, and close-quarters precision, all of it coordinated by Ash. Kestrel watched, her cold expression finally cracking with a flicker of disbelief. Her perfect, textbook ambush had devolved into a rout. These weren't just trainers. They were a perfectly balanced combat unit. Enraged, she targeted what she perceived as the weakest link. Ash was in the open, directing Lucario, his back momentarily turned. She raised her own custom-built rifle, its energy signature glowing a more potent, deadly crimson. The linchpin falls, she muttered, and fired. A beam of concentrated null energy shot across the field, aimed squarely at Ash. Ash, look out! Cynthia screamed. He heard the warning and turned, but it was too late. The beam was too fast. Pikachu, on his shoulder, tried to launch a thunderbolt, but it was little more than a spit of static in the suppressive field. He braced for the impact. He never felt it. From the corner of his eye, he saw a flash of blue. B's Graplocked, already entangled with one soldier, had reacted with impossible speed. Without a command from its trainer, it had flung the soldier aside and stretched one of its powerful tentacles, intercepting the crimson beam just feet from Ash. The tentacle hissed and steamed on impact, the Pokémon letting out a pained grunt, but it held. The energy dissipated harmlessly. Ash stared, stunned. He looked over at B, who was in the middle of disabling another soldier. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second. She felt it too, a sharp, protective impulse that had shot through the bond from her to her Pokémon. An instinct to protect the Warden. The intimacy of it, the sheer involuntary nature of the act, was more shocking to her than any physical blow. He gave her a quick, grateful nod over the chaos of the fight. She responded with a barely perceptible dip of her chin, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. A new, grudging respect was being forged in the heart of the battle. With her soldiers disabled, Kestrel tossed her rifle aside. Impressive, she said, her voice now a low, dangerous hiss. You are more than the data suggested. But this ends now. She tapped a device on her wrist, and a heavy ball materialized in her hand despite the null field. A personal override. She threw it, and a Metagross emerged. But it was wrong. This Metagross was covered in the same matte black alloy as the drone's, its natural silver skin augmented with sleek, glowing purple lines. It hovered with an unnatural silence, its red eye glowing with a cold, digital light. My own partner, Kestrel stated. Enhanced by the Foundation. It does not rely on bonds or spirit. It relies on superior technology. Metagross, Psycho Cut. The Metagross's claws glowed with psychic energy, amplified and sharpened by its augments. It unleashed a volley of blades that were faster and more precise than any Ash had ever seen. Lucario. Counter with Aura Sphere. Lucario fired a sphere of pure energy, but it collided with the Psycho Cuts and simply fizzled. The technology wasn't just blocking their power, it was actively nullifying it. Its armor is laced with null field emitters, Cynthia shouted from across the field, her strategist's mind already dissecting the new threat. Ranged energy attacks are useless. You have to get past its defenses. Kestrel smirked. There is no getting past them. Ash locked eyes with Lucario. There was no need for words. They had faced impossible odds before. They knew what they had to do. Let's show her a real bond, Lucario. Ash's aura flared, no longer a subtle shimmer but a visible, flowing mantle of blue energy that enveloped both him and his Pokémon. Lucario charged forward, not with an attack, but with pure, unadulterated speed. Metagross fired another volley of Psycho Cuts. Dodge, then Bone Rush, combo. Ash commanded. Lucario became a blur, weaving through the psychic blades with precognitive grace, his movements a perfect dance of evasion. He was in its face in an instant, a staff of bone energy appearing in his paws. He didn't aim for the augmented armor. He struck at the joints, the seams where the technology met the Pokemon. A clang of bone on metal rang out, followed by a quick jab to the central eye, forcing the Titan back. The battle became a duel of ideologies. The cold, calculated precision of Kestrel's tech-infused Metagross versus the fluid, unpredictable synergy of Ash and Lucario. Kestrel issued commands, but Ash and Lucario were already moving, anticipating, their bond a connection faster than the speed of sound. Their shared aura acted as a shield, deflecting the worst of the psychic pressure, their every blow aimed at the flaws in the machine. End this. Giga Impact. Kestrel ordered, frustrated. Metagross became wreathed in a terrifying shroud of destructive energy and charged. Meet it head on, Lucario. Close combat. It was suicide. Or it should have been. But as Lucario charged, Ash pushed all of his own energy, all of his will, through the bond. The aura around Lucario blazed like a blue star. He met the Giga Impact not with a single blow, but with a blinding flurry of fists, feet, and elbows, each strike powered by the raw, unfiltered energy of their bond. The final blow, an aura-infused uppercut, slammed into Metagross's chin. The purple lights on its armor flickered and died. The technological enhancements shorted out with a shower of sparks. The giant Pokemon froze, its eye went dim, and it crashed to the ground, unconscious. Silence fell once more upon the snowy battlefield. The remaining null field emitters sputtered and died. Kestrel stared at her fallen partner, then at Ash and Lucario, who stood panting but victorious. The disbelief on her face had been replaced by something else, a cold, analytical curiosity. This power, she whispered, more to herself than to them. The way you amplify each other, the director will need to see this. Before anyone could move to capture her, she tapped her wrist device again. A flashbang grenade dropped from her belt, erupting in a blinding white light and a deafening roar. By the time their vision cleared, she was gone. No escape ship, no trace. She had simply vanished. They were left standing in the snow, surrounded by a dozen unconscious soldiers and the wreckage of advanced technology. The fight was over. They had won. But it felt like a hollow victory. Ash looked at Cynthia. Their eyes met across the field, and a silent, heavy understanding passed between them. This Aegis Foundation was not some simple gang of criminals. They were organized. They were funded. They were technologically superior. And they were driven by an ideology that called the legendary Pokemon monsters. They had just made first contact with a new kind of enemy. An enemy that fought not with Pokemon, but with philosophy and overwhelming firepower. The world was far more complicated, and far more dangerous, than it had been an hour ago. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Crown. The journey from the cold, violated shores of Lake Acuity was a blur of hurried arrangements and grim silence. They had used Cynthia's authority to commandeer an emergency response helicopter from the nearest town, leaving the unconscious Aegis soldiers securely bound for the local police and the shaken rangers in the care of paramedics. There was no celebration of their victory, no relief. The image of Kestrel's confident disappearance and the cold efficiency of her technology had left a lasting, metallic taste of dread in their mouths. They landed on the rooftop helipad of the Sinnoh Pokemon League headquarters, a towering structure of modern glass and steel in the heart of Jubilife City. It was a building that projected strength, order, and authority. For the first time since their ordeal began, they were back on solid, familiar ground, within the very institution meant to govern and protect the world of Pokemon. Yet, the feeling of safety was conspicuously absent. Cynthia led the way, her long black coat sweeping behind her. Here, she was not just a powerful trainer, she was royalty. League officials and security personnel snapped to attention as she passed, their expressions a mixture of awe and concern at her unannounced, high-priority arrival. She strode through the polished corridors with a purpose that parted crowds, her face a mask of cold fury. Ash, Iris, and Bee followed in her wake, a mismatched, intimidating entourage that drew more than a few curious stares. Ash, with Pikachu on his shoulder, looked like a wandering trainer caught in a storm. Iris, with her wild hair and barely concealed impatience, looked like the storm itself. And Bee, silent and observant, radiated the dangerous stillness of its eye. They were ushered into an emergency conference room, a sterile, circular chamber dominated by a large holographic display table. Within minutes, the room was filled with the highest-ranking members of the Sinnoh League, grim-faced Elite Four members, stuffy-looking administrative heads, and a few high-ranking officials from the International Pokemon League, patched in via holographic transmission. Cynthia stood at the head of the table and laid out the facts with the cool, incisive precision of a surgeon. She recounted the events at Lake Acuity, her voice never wavering. She projected images they had taken with their Pokedexes, the unconscious rangers, the shattered drone, the scorch marks from the battle, and the most damning evidence of all, the empty, desecrated cave of Yuxi. The being of knowledge, a cornerstone of Sinnoh's very existence, has been abducted, she concluded, her gray eyes sweeping across the stunned faces in the room. The perpetrators are a group calling themselves the Aegis Foundation. They possess technology that can suppress a Pokemon's abilities, and their soldiers are trained for anti-trainer combat. This was not a crime of opportunity. It was a meticulously planned military operation. A wave of murmurs and horrified whispers filled the room. Aaron of the Elite Four slammed a fist on the table. Unacceptable. We'll dispatch the full force of the Ranger Union. We'll hunt these Aegis cowards down. And do what? A stuffy, gray-haired administrator countered, his voice dripping with cautious bureaucracy. Engage in open warfare with an unknown entity. We need more information. We must act with prudence. Iris scoffed audibly. Prudence. They stole a god. What more information do you need? Before the argument could escalate, the main doors to the conference room slid open. A woman in a sharp business suit hurried in and whispered something in the ear of the league chairman. The chairman's eyes widened slightly, and he nodded. It seems, he announced, his voice heavy with surprise, that we have a visitor. A representative from the Aegis Foundation has been waiting in our lobby for the past hour. He states he has come to clarify the situation. A chilling silence fell over the room. They had come here seeking help to fight a shadow war, only to find the enemy waiting for them on the front steps, asking to be let in. Let him in, Cynthia said, her voice dangerously low. The man who entered was the complete antithesis of the cold, brutal Commander Kestrel. He was tall, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored gray suit, with warm, intelligent eyes and a charismatic smile that seemed instantly disarming. He had sandy blonde hair, lightly tanned skin, and he carried himself not with the arrogance of a conqueror, but with the calm, assured confidence of a professor about to deliver a lecture he knew would change his students' lives. He looked at the assembled masters of the Pokemon world with an expression of patient understanding. Thank you for seeing me, he said, his voice a smooth, reasonable baritone. My name is Valerius. I am the director of the Aegis Foundation. He gave a slight, respectful nod towards Cynthia. Champion, it is an honor. I must apologize for the robust methods of my security chief, Commander Kestrel. She is passionate about her work, but her threat assessment protocols can be, at times, overly aggressive. The sheer audacity of his casual, almost friendly apology left the room speechless. You apologize. Iris snarled, stepping forward. You march into a sacred site, attack innocent people, and steal a legendary Pokemon, and you have the nerve to apologize for being aggressive. Valerius turned his calm, reasonable gaze to her. Stole? He asked, a hint of scholarly curiosity in his tone. My dear champion of Unova, that's such a loaded term. We did not steal Yuxi. We secured it. We placed it in protective custody. Protective custody. The chairman sputtered. From what? Valerius's smile faded, replaced by a look of grave seriousness. He gestured to the holographic table. May I? At the chairman's hesitant nod, he touched the console. The images of Lake Acuity vanished, replaced by a rapid-fire montage of global disasters. A terrifying, primal Groudon, wreathed in sunlight, scorching the landscape of Hoenn. A berserk Dialga and Palkia tearing reality apart above Alamo's town. A shadowy Giratina dragging the world into its distorted realm. The footage was raw, terrifying, and undeniable. For centuries, Valerius began, his voice resonating with conviction, humanity has lived at the mercy of these beings. We call them legendaries, guardians, gods. But what are they truly? They are weapons of mass destruction with unpredictable temperaments and incomprehensible motives. They are living, breathing natural disasters. Every time two of them clash, Continents are threatened, cities are erased, and thousands of innocent lives are put at risk. We don't worship volcanoes or earthquakes. Why, then, do we sanctify the very beings who cause cataclysms on a planetary scale? He let the question hang in the air. The League officials shifted uncomfortably. He was voicing a truth they had always known but had never dared to speak so plainly. The Aegis Foundation, Valerius continued, believes that humanity's future cannot be left to the whims of such chaotic forces. Our mission is not to harm these creatures. It is to contain them. To study them. To neutralize the threat they pose until we can find a permanent solution that ensures the safety of everyone. He looked around the room. We are not villains. We are the first responders to a crisis that has been ignored for far too long. Ash felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. This man was dangerous. He wasn't fighting them with Pokemon, he was fighting them with logic. He was twisting their entire world, reframing the sacred as a threat, the protectors as a menace. And what gives you the right? Ash's voice cut through the silence. All eyes turned to him. Who gave you the authority to make that decision for the rest of the world? Valerius's warm, intelligent eyes settled on Ash. For the first time, a flicker of something else appeared in his expression, a keen, piercing interest. Ah, the warden, he said softly. The boy who stood at the center of the storm. An excellent question. And I ask you this in return. What gives a divine being the right to appear in a stadium and forcibly bind you to 3 other individuals against your will? Who gave it the authority? He turned his attention to the holographic officials. This is the other side of the crisis. Not only are we threatened by these beings, but now they are beginning to interfere directly. Choosing champions. Creating cults. He gestured to Ash's group. A warden and his pillars. Anointed by a divine power, operating outside of any law or government oversight. Accountable to no one. Are they heroes? Or are they the vanguards of a divine agenda that has no regard for human life or liberty? He had turned the tables completely. Suddenly, Ash and the others were not the plaintiffs, they were the accused. They were the unknown, the dangerous, the rogue element. The final, most devastating blow was aimed directly at Cynthia. Champion, Valerius said, his voice softening with a feigned empathy that was more insulting than any threat. You, more than anyone, have dedicated your life to the myths and history of Sinnoh. You revere the balance between Dialga and Palkia. But tell me, were the people of Alamos Town grateful for that balance when their homes were being erased from existence? Your duty is to the people of this region. So I must ask, in all sincerity, who do you truly serve? The people who live in fear of the gods? Or the gods who threaten the people? Cynthia stood frozen, speechless. It was a vicious, perfectly crafted attack, striking at the very core of her identity as a champion. Her entire life had been built on the belief that protecting the legends was protecting her people. Valerius had just presented a world where those 2 duties were mutually exclusive. The bond, that unwelcome wire connecting their minds, hummed with a torrent of shared anxiety. Ash felt Cynthia's world tilting on its axis, a dizzying wave of intellectual and moral confusion. He felt Iris's simmering rage at being trapped in a room where words were the weapons, a fight she didn't know how to win. He felt Bee's silent, profound disgust, at the Aegis Foundation's twisted logic, but also at the League's palpable hesitation. The politicians were being swayed. They were considering it. The chairman cleared his throat, his expression deeply troubled. Director Valerius, your words, they carry a heavy weight. The League will need to convene an international summit to discuss these claims. Until such a time, we must insist that you cease all Aegis Foundation activities. Valerius smiled, a thin, triumphant smile. It was a meaningless gesture, and everyone in the room knew it. A summit meant weeks, if not months, of debate, bureaucracy, and inaction. It was a political victory. He had successfully tied the hands of the entire Pokemon League. Of course, Mr. Chairman, he said smoothly. We at the Foundation are, above all, reasonable. We will await your decision. He gave a final, polite nod to the room and then looked at Ash's group, his gaze lingering for a moment. Warden, pillars, I do hope we can find a peaceful resolution to our ideological differences. With that, he turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving a trail of chaos and doubt in his wake. The moment the doors closed, the room erupted into frantic arguments. Ash tuned them out. He looked at his companions. Iris was pacing like a caged hyena. B was staring at the door through which Valerius had left, her expression harder than granite. And Cynthia had sunk into her chair, her face pale, her gaze distant. The charismatic director had landed a blow far more damaging than any Pokemon attack. He had planted a seed of poison in the heart of their strongest strategist. They had come here seeking an army. Instead, they had been isolated, discredited, and left utterly, terrifyingly alone. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Bond. The portal to the Sinjo ruins shimmered and closed behind them, cutting off the sterile air and frantic arguments of the Pokemon League. It sealed them back inside their silent, celestial sanctuary, a prison that now felt more like a refuge. The sudden tranquility was deafening. In the conference room, they had been a unit, united against a common foe. Here, in the soft twilight of the reconstructed ruins, the fractures between them were thrown into sharp relief. Iris was the first to break the silence, a low growl of frustration rumbling in her chest. She slammed a fist against one of the smooth wooden pillars, the impact echoing in the vast chamber. Words. That's all it was. He didn't fight, he just talked. And they listened. The champions, the Elite Four, they just sat there and let him poison them. B stood near the central pool, her reflection a perfect, stoic mirror on the still water. It was a strategic victory for him, she stated, her voice flat but laced with a cold fury. He identified the opponent's weakness, their indecisiveness, and exploited it perfectly. He has neutralized the single greatest military force in the world without a single Pokemon battle. She was right, and the cold, tactical assessment was more damning than any of Iris's rage. The League hadn't been defeated, it had been rendered irrelevant. Ash's gaze, however, was on Cynthia. The Sinnoh champion had walked to the edge of the courtyard, her back to them, staring out at the swirling nebula that passed for a sky. She was unnaturally still. The bond, that ever-present psychic wire, was humming with a low, agonizing frequency of pure, unfiltered doubt. It was a cold, sharp feeling, like shattered glass grinding in his mind. Valerius's words had been a virus, and Cynthia's brilliant, analytical mind was the perfect host. Cynthia? Ash asked, his voice gentle. She didn't turn. He used my own research, she said, her voice a hollow whisper. The myths of creation, the balance of the dimensions, I've spent my life trying to understand and preserve it. He took that knowledge and twisted it into a weapon. He made it sound logical. She finally turned, and the look in her eyes was one of profound, intellectual agony. He asked who I served. The people or the gods? A champion should never have to choose. The raw vulnerability in her voice silenced both Iris and B. They were seeing past the untouchable champion, the master strategist, and glimpsing the woman buckling under the impossible weight of her crown. Ash felt a sudden, sharp pang of empathy for her, amplified and transmitted through the bond. He walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. He didn't offer an easy answer or a comforting lie. He couldn't. Maybe it's the wrong question, he said quietly. Cynthia looked at him, her brow furrowed. What? The question isn't people or gods, Ash explained, thinking it through as he spoke. Maybe the question is balance or control. We fight to keep the balance. Valerius fights to take control. That's the difference. It was a simple distinction, but it was like a sliver of light in her spiraling darkness. It didn't solve her crisis, but it reframed it. It gave her a new axis on which to orient her thoughts. She gave him a small, grateful nod, a silent acknowledgement that he had thrown her a lifeline. We're all exhausted, Ash announced to the group, taking command not through force, but through a quiet, emotional clarity. And we're no good to Yuxi or anyone else if we tear each other apart. We rest. We recover. We face this tomorrow. No one argued. The emotional and mental toll of the last few hours had been heavier than any physical battle. They each found a separate part of the serene temple to settle down in, the unspoken need for space creating a wide, hostile gulf between them. But as sleep, fitful and unwelcome, finally claimed them, the physical distance became meaningless. The walls between their minds, already thin and brittle, began to crumble. Sleep was not an escape. It was an invasion. Ash dreamt he was in a vast, silent library. The scent of old paper and dust was thick in the air. He was surrounded by towering shelves of ancient, leather-bound books filled with text he couldn't quite read. A crushing weight of expectation bore down on him, a silent, screaming pressure to know everything, to have every answer, to be infallible. He felt a profound, aching loneliness, the isolation of a mind so far above others that it could never truly connect. He felt the phantom ache of a tension headache that had been a constant companion for years. He was not Ash Ketchum. He was Cynthia, and the crown of the champion was made of lead. He woke with a gasp, the feeling of intellectual exhaustion so real he felt mentally bruised. Across the courtyard, he saw Cynthia jolt awake at the same moment, her hand at her temple. B dreamt she was standing in a stadium, the roar of the crowd a deafening wave. But she wasn't the one fighting. She was watching a boy and his Charizard face a powerful Blaziken. She felt the boy's fierce determination, the sting of the heat, the thrill of the battle. Then she felt the crushing, gut-wrenching disappointment of defeat. The dream shifted. She was in a rain-soaked forest, watching the same boy, soaked and shivering, trying to earn the trust of a defiant Chimchar. The scene changed again. A different stadium, a different opponent, a sleek Greninja against a monstrous Charizard. She felt the perfect, heady rush of synergy, the feeling of two minds becoming one, and then the shattering, world-ending agony of a final, decisive blow. She felt the loss, the failure. But underneath it all, she felt something that shocked her to her core, a quiet, unbreakable resilience. A spirit that got knocked down, again and again, and simply, got back up. She was seeing Ash's greatest losses through his own eyes, and she was stunned to find not weakness, but a strength more profound than any she had ever cultivated through discipline. She awoke with her heart pounding, her body tensed for a fight. She saw Ash staring into the nebulous sky, and for the first time, her analytical gaze held not just challenge, but a flicker of grudging respect. Iris dreamt she was small, nestled in the crook of a familiar trainer's arm. The world was a kaleidoscope of color and sound. She felt a simple, pure, unconditional love that was as powerful and sustaining as a sun. She felt the playful nip of a hand-fed berry, the thrill of a mock battle, the comforting scratch behind the ears. The world smelled of pine needles, ozone, and the faint, familiar scent of her trainer. It was a bond that went beyond words, beyond commands, into something primal and familial. She wasn't just watching Ash and Pikachu. She was Pikachu, experiencing a connection so deep it made her own powerful bond with her dragons feel like a distant echo. It was a partnership not of a master and a weapon, but of two halves of the same soul. She woke up with a strange warmth in her chest, the phantom sensation of a comforting presence still lingering. Her usual scowl was gone, replaced by a look of deep, contemplative confusion. She looked over at Ash, who was talking quietly with his partner, and the anger she had felt towards him seemed childish. Misplaced. They all rose, the silence between them different now. It was no longer empty and hostile. It was filled with the ghosts of shared experiences, with an unwelcome, undeniable empathy. They had glimpsed the core of one another, and the sight had left them irrevocably changed. It was into this new, fragile quiet that a new presence arrived. The water in the central pool began to glow. It wasn't the cold, silver light of the transport portal. This was a soft, gentle, rose-gold luminescence that pulsed with a warm, inviting energy. A shape formed within the light, and a Pokémon floated gracefully into the air above the pool. It was a Latias. Her sleek, jet-like body was a soft white and vibrant red, and her golden eyes held an intelligence and kindness that was immediately distinct from the Xerneas's terrifying majesty. She didn't speak with a voice of 1,000 tones. A gentle, melodic thought, like the chiming of a crystal bell, touched their minds. Less than I was afraid. Greater than. She circled the courtyard once, her gaze lingering on each of them before finally settling on Ash. A wave of pure, undiluted recognition and affection washed through their bond. Less than, but then I heard a song I recognized. A kind and brave melody, surrounded by new, strong harmonies. I followed it here. Greater than. Ash's heart leapt. He knew her. Alto mare. He breathed. Latias dipped her head in acknowledgement. Less than you have not forgotten. Greater than she floated closer to him, her presence a comforting balm against the tension that had gripped them for so long. She nuzzled her head against his shoulder, and Pikachu chirped happily, scrambling up to greet her. You were drawn here by us? Cynthia asked, taking a hesitant step forward. Less than your combined spirit, your aura, it shines like a beacon. Greater than Latius explained, turning her warm gaze to the champion. Less than a beacon of defiance in a world that is growing cold with fear. My brother, and others like us, have gone into hiding. We feel the silence. We feel the cages being prepared. Greater than. Her words gave a voice to the victims of Aegis, a perspective that Valerius had so skillfully omitted. She was not a chaotic monster. She was a refugee, seeking asylum. Less than I saw the herald's ritual from afar. I saw you were bound together against your will. Greater than Latius continued. She then looked directly at Ash, her golden eyes filled with a fierce resolve. Less than, but I am not here by force. I wish to add my voice to your song. I wish to be a bridge between your world and mine. I choose to be a pillar. If you will have me. Greater than. She was offering herself. Her power. Her knowledge. Her very essence. It was a choice, freely given, and it fundamentally changed the nature of the bond. It wasn't just a chain anymore. It could be a choice. A willing alliance. Ash looked at Cynthia, Iris, and B. He saw the question in their eyes. He didn't make the decision for them. He simply nodded towards Latius, giving them the space to accept or refuse. Cynthia was the first to step forward, her earlier crisis giving way to a renewed sense of purpose. Your insight would be invaluable. We would be honored. Iris followed, a genuine, if hesitant, smile on her face. A dragon on our side. I'm not gonna say no to that. B simply gave a firm, respectful nod. Latius trilled happily. She floated over the central pool, and as she touched its surface, a soft, rose gold tendril of light emerged, branching out and gently touching each of them. This time, there was no violation, no jarring invasion. It felt like a warm hand taking theirs. The bond settled, the discordant hum softening into a more stable, resonant chord. The pillar of soul had taken her place. In her excitement, Latius shimmered and transformed, her draconic form melting away into that of the girl Bianca, her artist's beret and simple dress a familiar, welcome sight to Ash. She smiled brightly, a beacon of hope in their dark, uncertain world. For the first time since this began, they were not just four prisoners. They were a team. Far away, in a place of sterile white walls and cold, controlled light, Director Valerius sat in a comfortable armchair. Before him, Euxi, the being of knowledge, floated silently within a shimmering containment field of purple and black energy. Its three tails drifted languidly. Its eyes were closed, as they had been for 1,000 years. Valerius held a data tablet, but his attention was on the captive legendary. He was not gloating. He was not dissecting it. He was reasoning with it. You see, that is the fundamental flaw in your design, he said, his voice calm and conversational, as if speaking to an old colleague. You hold all knowledge. You are a living library of every event that has ever occurred. But you have no context. No wisdom. You see a meteor, and you know its trajectory. I see a meteor, and I know it will destroy families, end dreams, and create orphans. You are pure, unfeeling data. He set the tablet aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression one of earnest, passionate conviction. Your very existence, and that of your siblings, invites chaos. It creates an imbalance of power that humanity has struggled under for millennia. You are the divine parents who refuse to let their children grow up. But humanity has evolved. We are ready to stand on our own. We must be allowed to leave the nest. He stood and walked closer to the containment field, his reflection warped on its crackling surface. And if that means clipping the wings of the gods themselves to do so, then it is a price I am more than willing to pay. Euxi did not respond. Its eyes remained closed. But a single, shimmering tear, made not of water but of pure, crystallized psychic energy, slowly traced a path down its small, gray face. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Valor Gauntlet. The atmosphere in the Sinjo ruins had shifted. The oppressive weight of their forced captivity had been replaced by a low, simmering hum of potential energy. Latius's voluntary inclusion in the bond had been a catalyst, transforming the chain that bound them into a circuit, now complete and humming with a strange new power. They were still prisoners of a divine decree, but for the first time, they felt less like captives and more like a garrison. They had spent the early hours after Latius's arrival in a state of focused preparation. There was no more infighting, no more debate over the nature of their predicament. Valerius's calculated assault on their ideals had stripped away all illusions. They had an enemy, and that enemy had a head start. The warning, when it came, was not a shout but a whisper through their shared consciousness. Latius, in her human form as Bianca, was sitting by the central pool, her eyes closed in concentration, when she suddenly gasped. Her hands flew to her temples, her expression one of pained empathy. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror, sharp and piercing, flooded the bond. It was not their own. It was an external feeling, a psychic scream that Latius's attuned senses had intercepted and now broadcast to all of them. It was a feeling of fierce defiance being overwhelmed, of courage being systematically extinguished. What is it? Ash asked, immediately at her side. It's Azulf, she breathed, her voice trembling. The being of valor. It's at Lake Valor. It feels the Aegis Foundation approaching. It's not running. It's preparing to fight. It's so brave and so afraid. Cynthia, who was studying the intricate patterns on the temple floor as if they were a star chart, immediately stood. They're moving on the second Lake Guardian already. They're accelerating their plan. Then we stop them, Iris declared, her voice a low growl. She was already strapping on her gloves, a predator preparing for the hunt. No more talking. No more letting them get away. This time, we break them. Rushing in is what they'll expect, be countered, her voice a calm, steadying anchor in the rising tide of emotion. She was performing a series of slow, deliberate stretches, her body a study in controlled power. Kestrel was a soldier. She will have analyzed our tactics from the first encounter. She will have adapted. We need a better plan than charge. B's right, Ash agreed, his mind already shifting into a tactical state. He looked at the three powerful women around him, and Latius, the vital link to their new world. He was the warden, the central node of this impossible team. It was his responsibility to make them more than the sum of their parts. Cynthia, you know Sinnoh better than anyone. What are we looking at for terrain at Lake Valor? A shimmering portal to the lakeside materialized at Ash's command, a silent testament to his growing control over the warden's abilities. Cynthia didn't step through, she merely peered into it, her mind absorbing the landscape like a supercomputer. It's a large, open basin, much wider than Acuity, she began, her strategic mind kicking into high gear. The lake itself is vast, with the entrance to Azulf's cavern on a small island in the center. The shoreline is ringed by dense forest, but the immediate banks are clear. An attacking force has very little cover on approach. So they'll use that against us, B surmised. They will fortify the shoreline, use their null field technology to create a kill zone, and pick us off before we can even reach the island. They'll expect us to come from the air or make a direct ground assault, Ash said, the plan beginning to form in his mind. So we'll do both. He looked at Iris and Latius. You two are our spearhead. Your job is speed and shock. Punch a hole in their outer defenses. Don't get bogged down. Just cause as much chaos as you can and draw their fire. Iris grinned, her eyes flashing. A distraction. I can do that. Latius, back in her true form, trilled in agreement, her body humming with psychic energy. Cynthia, B, you and I are the ground team, Ash continued. Once Iris and Latius open a path, we make landfall. Our priority is taking out their null field generators. They'll be mobile, protected. B, your team is precision. Graplocked and your other fighters will be perfect for disabling their hardware up close. Cynthia, we'll need Garchomp's raw power to shatter their main formations and create openings. And you, Warden? Cynthia asked, her gaze sharp and appraising. My job is to keep us all connected, Ash said, a faint blue aura flickering around him. I'll be the battlefield coordinator. I have more than 6 Pokemon with me. I can rotate my team to counter whatever they throw at us. While you focus on your targets, I'll watch all our backs. It was a solid plan, a symphony of their individual strengths. Cynthia's strategy, B's tactics, Iris's ferocity, and Ash's adaptable command. They looked at each other, a silent consensus passing between them. They were ready. Let's go show them what a real bond can do, Ash said, his voice ringing with a confidence that left no room for doubt. The air above Lake Valor was thick with the hum of hostile technology. B's prediction had been horrifyingly accurate. The entire shoreline was a fortress. Sleek black Aegis mechs, bipedal machines twice the height of a man, patrolled the perimeter. Automated turrets, armed with null energy cannons, were sunk into the frozen earth. And moving between them were squads of Aegis soldiers, their formations tight and disciplined. In the center of their encampment, 3 large, truck-sized vehicles were emitting the familiar, nauseating purple-black haze of a wide-area null field. Hovering on a command platform near the generators was Commander Kestrel. Her tech-infused Metagross floated silently beside her. She scanned the horizon, her expression one of cold, certain anticipation. She knew they were coming. She didn't have to wait long. 2 streaks, one orange and one red, descended from the clouds like meteors. Iris stood atop her Dragonite, her hair whipping in the wind, a wild war cry tearing from her lips. Beside her, Latias streaked through the air, cloaked in a shimmering psychic barrier. Dragon Claw! Iris screamed. Dragonite's claws ignited with emerald energy as it dove, slamming into one of the Aegis mechs with the force of a bomb. The machine buckled, sparks flying as it was torn apart. Latias didn't use a physical attack. She unleashed a wave of psychic force that scrambled the targeting systems of a dozen turrets at once, causing them to fire wildly into the air. Air support engaged. Kestrel's voice was clipped, professional. All anti-air units, focus fire on the hostiles. Do not let them breathe. The sky erupted in a storm of purple energy blasts. Iris and Dragonite weaved through the barrage with breathtaking skill, answering with their own torrent of dragon pulses. Latias moved like a ghost, her psychic abilities allowing her to anticipate the shots, the energy blasts passing harmlessly through her after images. The chaos in the sky was the perfect diversion. On the opposite shore, a second portal shimmered into existence for a split second. Ash, Cynthia, and B stepped out, their Pokémon already materialized and ready for battle. Infernape, Flame Wheel, Ash commanded. Garchomp, Stone Edge, Cynthia ordered. Graplocked, Octolock, B directed. The 3 Pokémon hit the Aegis flank like a tidal wave. Infernape became a spinning vortex of fire, plowing through a squad of soldiers and sending them scattering. Garchomp slammed its claws into the ground, and pillars of sharp rock erupted from beneath a heavy mech, lifting it off the ground and toppling it. Graplocked's tentacles shot out, ensnaring 2 soldiers at once, their high-tech rifles crushed like toys. The battle was joined. It was a maelstrom of conflicting energies. The oppressive null field fought against the raw power of their Pokémon, but Ash's Warden aura was a tangible force on the battlefield. It pulsed from him in waves, a constant, reassuring pressure that fortified his allies. Less than Cynthia. Heavy turret, 70 degrees left. Its power core is exposed at the rear. Greater than the thought was a flash of pure tactical data in her mind. Garchomp, Dragon Rush. Cynthia commanded without hesitation. Her Pokémon became a blur of blue, circling the turret and striking the weak point Ash had identified, causing the machine to explode from within. Less than B, that generator is shielded. The soldiers protecting it are in a phalanx formation. Break their shields first. Greater than. Machamp, on me. B yelled, releasing her 4-armed powerhouse. Focus punch on the shield bearers. She and Machamp moved in perfect sync, their combined martial prowess shattering the soldiers' energy shields, leaving the generator vulnerable for Graplock to dismantle. Ash was the nexus of the battle. He wasn't just fighting his own corner, he was fighting the entire war. He saw everything, felt everything through the bond. He saw an energy blast streaking towards Iris from her blind spot and had Infernape launch a flamethrower to intercept it. He felt B's Machamp beginning to tire and knew what to do. Infernape, return, he yelled, recalling the fire type. Sceptile, I choose you. Leaf blade on those mechs, leg joints. The forest Pokémon was a flash of green, its movements impossibly fast. It darted between the clumsy legs of the Aegis mechs, the glowing blades on its arms severing hydraulic cables and support struts, bringing the machines crashing down. It was a perfect tactical swap, using speed and precision where brute force was being hampered. Kestrel watched from her command platform, her face a mask of cold fury. Her flawless defense was being systematically dismantled. It wasn't just a battle, it was a coordinated demolition. And the center of it all was Ash Ketchum. He wasn't just commanding his Pokemon, he was commanding a team of champions as if they were extensions of his own will. All units, converge on the Warden. She commanded, her voice betraying her rage. Eliminate him. The structure will collapse without its keystone. The remaining mechs and soldiers turned their full attention on Ash. Oh no, you don't. Iris roared from above. She and Dragonite dove, unleashing a devastating Draco meteor that rained down on the converging Aegis forces, scattering them and buying Ash the time he needed. Thanks, Iris. Ash yelled. I owe you one. He looked towards the command platform, his eyes locking with Kestrel's. The head of the snake. I'm ending this. Lucario, let's go. He recalled Sceptile and sent out his aura partner. Lucario landed silently on the frozen ground, its red eyes glowing with focus. Lucario, extreme speed. They shot across the battlefield, a blue and black blur, heading directly for the command platform. Kestrel met his charge, leaping down from the platform, her augmented Metagross landing in front of her with a ground-shaking thud. You will not interfere, she hissed. We already have. Ash shot back. It's over, Kestrel. Your plan failed. The mission is not complete until Azulf is secured, she retorted. Metagross, psychic. The air around Lucario compressed, a massive telekinetic force trying to crush him. But Ash's aura flared, creating a protective shield that pushed back against the psychic assault. Lucario grunted but held his ground. Our bond is stronger this time, Kestrel. Aura sphere. Lucario fired a blast of pure energy. Kestrel's Metagross countered with a flash cannon, and the two attacks exploded in a blinding flash of light. The duel was a repeat of their last encounter, but everything was amplified. Kestrel was more ruthless, her Metagross's attacks faster and empowered by a new, overclocked energy system. But Ash and Lucario were more connected, their movements seamless, their power boosted by the complete, five-way bond. We cannot be beaten by an emotion. Kestrel screamed, her professional demeanor shattering. Technology is absolute. Metagross, Meteor Mash. Meet it, Lucario. Close combat. The two powerhouses clashed. It was a brutal, close-range ballet of destruction. Metal against aura, calculation against synergy. Lucario was faster, more fluid, his strikes landing with a speed that the larger Metagross couldn't match. A final, aura-infused uppercut sent the tech-infused Pokémon staggering back, its system sparking and failing. With a groan of protesting metal, Metagross collapsed. Kestrel stared in disbelief, defeated again. Now, Ash said, his voice low and firm, call off your remaining forces. Before Kestrel could respond, a piercing psychic cry echoed across the entire lake, a pure, concentrated wave of valor. From the island in the center of the lake, Azulf emerged. It shot through the air, a blue and red comet of pure willpower, and slammed into the last of the null field generators, causing it to explode in a shower of sparks. With their power source gone, the remaining Aegis mechs and turrets went dead. The battle was won. Iris landed Dragonite nearby, Bee and Cynthia joining them, their Pokémon having subdued the last of the soldiers. They had done it. They had saved Azulf. Kestrel looked at her defeated forces, then at the triumphant team, and then at the defiant legendary floating above them. A strange, bitter smile touched her lips. You actually won. It's over, Ash said, stepping forward. Yes, Kestrel agreed softly. It is. She tapped her wrist calm. Director, Phase 1 is complete. The diversion was a success. A cold dread washed over Ash, colder than the Sinnoh air. Diversion. A holographic screen flickered into existence from a hidden projector on Kestrel's wrist. It showed the calm, smiling face of Director Valerius. He was not in his white room. He was standing in a familiar, mist-shrouded cavern. Excellent work, Commander, Valerius's voice was warm and congratulatory. And my sincerest congratulations to you as well, Warden. Your performance was even more impressive than I had anticipated. You have proven the viability of the Warden Pillar system beyond all doubt. The camera panned down. Floating serenely in front of Valerius, trapped within a small, portable containment field, was Mesprit, the being of emotion. Its eyes were closed, a single, crystalline tear tracing a path down its cheek. While you and my entire security force were engaged in your spectacular little war game, Valerius explained calmly, I took a quiet trip to Lake Verity. It was quite peaceful, I assure you. Mesprit didn't even put up a fight. The reality of the situation crashed down on them with the force of a physical blow. The entire battle, the fortress, the mechs, Kestrel, Metagross, it was all a distraction. A grand, theatrical production designed to keep all of them, the world's most powerful trainers, occupied on one side of the region while he quietly picked up his real prize on the other. I have Yuxi, the mind. And now Mesprit, the heart, Valerius said, his smile never wavering. Thank you, Warden. Your predictable heroism has served my goals perfectly. The hologram shut off. Kestrel tapped her wrist again, and a cloaked transport ship shimmered into existence above them. A beam of light enveloped her. Until next time, Warden, she said, her voice once again cold and professional. She and the unconscious Metagross were pulled into the sky. The ship vanished as silently as it had appeared. They were left standing in the wreckage of their own victory, the silence broken only by the whistling wind. They had fought their hardest. They had won. And they had lost everything. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The God Machine. The silence that followed Kestrel's departure was heavier and more profound than any null field. It was the sound of absolute defeat, a vacuum where the adrenaline and triumph of moments before had been. They stood in the center of a battlefield they had won, surrounded by the wreckage of their enemy's army, and yet the victory tasted like ash in their mouths. They had been played. Every move they made, every ounce of power they exerted, had been a meticulously choreographed step in Valerius's grand design. Iris was the first to move, recalling her Dragonite with a sharp, angry gesture. She kicked a piece of shattered mech plating, sending it skittering across the ice with a useless, unsatisfying clatter. A diversion. She spat, her voice a low, furious tremor. He used us. He made us dance for him like a bunch of puppets while he walked away with the real prize. Bee was methodically recalling her own Pokemon, her movements precise and economical, betraying none of the seething frustration that Ash could feel from her through the bond. It was a cold, disciplined anger, the fury of a master tactician who had been comprehensively outwitted. We focused on the visible threat, she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. It was a classic misdirection gambit. We were strategically blind. All eyes, inevitably, turned to Ash. It had been his plan. His coordination. His leadership that had secured their hollow victory. He felt the weight of their silent judgment, but there was no accusation in it, only a shared, bitter sense of failure. He didn't deflect or make excuses. It's on me, he said, his voice quiet but clear. He recalled Lucario, who gave him a reassuring look before disappearing in a flash of red light. I saw the army and assumed it was the real attack. I let him get in my head. I underestimated him. We all did, Cynthia said, her voice strained. She was staring at the spot where the hologram had vanished, her mind replaying Valerius's calm, smiling face. He doesn't think like a conqueror. He thinks like a philosopher. He's not trying to win a battle. He's trying to prove a point, and he's willing to sacrifice his entire security force to do it. Their recriminations were interrupted by a soft, chiming presence. Azulf, the being of valor, floated down from the sky, its twin tails trailing behind it like ethereal banners. It circled them once, and a wave of pure, undiluted gratitude washed over them, a stark contrast to their own dark mood. It was a feeling of courage rekindled, of a spirit saved from the brink. Less than you fought with great valor, greater than its thought voice echoed in their minds. It was a clear, ringing tone, filled with a youthful, indomitable spirit. Less than you saved this sacred place. You saved me. But my siblings, I feel their light dimming. Their voices are afraid. Greater than. We failed them, Ash said, the words tasting like poison. We saved you, but we lost Mesprit. Less than then your fight is not over. Greater than Azulf declared, its small body blazing with a fierce blue light. Less than valor is not the absence of fear, but the will to act in spite of it. You have stumbled, but you have not fallen. You must see what they are facing. You must understand what you are truly up against. Greater than. Before they could react, Azulf's blue gem on its forehead pulsed with an intense, blinding light. The world around them dissolved. It wasn't a teleportation. It was a psychic projection, a vision being forced directly into their shared consciousness. The sensation was dizzying, like being pulled through a keyhole at impossible speed. They were no longer standing on the frozen shores of Lake Valor. They were adrift in a cold, dark, non-space, observers in a vision not their own. Before them hung a structure of impossible scale, a flying fortress. It was a vast, circular platform of the same matte black alloy as Kestrel's machines, miles in diameter. It wasn't flying through brute force, it hovered with a silent, unnatural grace, defying gravity itself. Intricate lines of purple energy pulsed across its surface, and fleets of the insect-like drones they'd fought patrolled its perimeter like antibodies around a virus. This was the Aegis headquarters. This was the Aegis. The vision plunged them downwards, phasing through the fortress's hull into its very heart. They found themselves in a cavernous chamber, a cathedral of cold, white metal and humming technology. In the center of the chamber, two figures floated, trapped in separate, crackling containment fields. It was Yuxi and Mesprit. A collective gasp of horror echoed through their shared mind. The two legendaries were not merely being held, they were being drained. Thick, black cables snaked from the walls, attaching to their containment fields and siphoning away their energy. Yuxi's light was dim, its very presence a whisper of knowledge. Mesprit's form was flickering, its aura of emotion muted to a dull, throbbing ache of sorrow. Their pain was a palpable, psychic scream that clawed at the edges of the vision. The stolen energy, a river of raw psychic and emotional power, was being channeled into the chamber's central structure, a machine of terrifying and blasphemous design. It was a cannon. A weapon of such colossal size it made a skyscraper look like a toy. It was built from the same sterile white and black materials, but its design incorporated something ancient, something sacred. Cynthia recognized it instantly, and a strangled cry of disbelief escaped her lips. The focusing array, the energy conduits, the stabilization gyros, they were all based on the architecture of the spear pillar. It was her history, her culture, her life's work, perverted into a weapon of cosmic annihilation. The vision pulled them along the length of the cannon, towards its target. It wasn't aimed at a city, or a continent, or even the sky. It was aimed at a concept. Through the main viewscreen of the fortress's command deck, they could see their target, a shimmering, invisible point in space that the ship's sensors rendered as a complex, multi-dimensional gateway. It was the pathway, the connection point, the link between their world and the realm beyond, the Hall of Origin. The vision coalesced into a final, horrifying image, a simulation, projected in the air before the cannon. It showed the weapon firing. A beam of pure, concentrated null energy, powered by the stolen essence of mind and emotion, shot out and struck the gateway. The gateway didn't explode. It simply unraveled. The link between the dimensions was not destroyed, but surgically, cleanly severed. The simulation ended with their world, their entire reality, being encased in a shell of impenetrable static, forever cut off from the divine power that had created it. Valerius wasn't trying to kill Arceus. He was trying to exile it. He was trying to put a lock on the door to heaven and throw away the key. The vision shattered, and they were back on the shores of Lake Valor, gasping for air as if they had just surfaced from a deep, cold ocean. Azulf floated before them, its light flickering with exertion and fury. Iris was shaking, her rage so profound it had become a cold, hard silence. Bee was staring at her hands, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles were bone white. But it was Cynthia who was the most affected. She stumbled back, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a unique, scholarly horror. The spear pillar, she whispered, her voice cracking. The lore, it's not just a temple. It's the anchor. The point where the fabric of our reality is thinnest, where it's pinned to the Hall of Origin. If that connection is severed, she couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too catastrophic to comprehend. My research, the translation of the ancient texts, he must have stolen it. He used my work to find the anchor and build a weapon to destroy it. The weight of her unwitting complicity crashed down on her. It wasn't just her ideals that had been attacked, it was her legacy, twisted to serve the very antithesis of everything she believed in. This was a violation far deeper than the bond. Ash walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. The contact was firm, steadying. This isn't your fault, Cynthia. It's his. His voice was calm, but underneath it was a new, hard edge of absolute resolve. The vision had burned away any remaining doubt, any hesitation. He now understood his role. He was the warden of the seal that Valerius was about to shatter. Aboard the flying fortress Aegis, Commander Kestrel stood at attention on the pristine white bridge. Before her, Director Valerius watched a replay of the Battle of Lake Valor on a vast holographic screen, a small, appreciative smile on his face. Their synergy is remarkable, he commented, pausing the image on a frame showing Ash and Lucario enveloped in their shared aura. Unquantifiable, illogical, and yet, undeniably effective. You performed your role perfectly, Commander. I was defeated, Kestrel stated, her voice tight. The loss still stung, a sour note in the symphony of her professional pride. The Warden's power, it doesn't follow conventional battle metrics. It adapts. It inspires. Valerius turned away from the screen, his warm eyes meeting her cold ones. Defeat is a matter of perspective. Your objective was not to win the battle, but to confirm the Warden's capabilities under extreme duress. You succeeded. You pushed him, and in doing so, you forced him to strengthen the bond. You helped temper the very weapon that will be his undoing. Kestrel's brow furrowed. Sir, I don't understand. The Arceus catcher is nearly complete, Valerius explained, gesturing towards the heart of his ship. But the energy required to fire it is immense. Even with the power of Euxie and Mesprit, we can only gather enough for a single, sustained blast. And to breach the dimensional barrier at the spear pillar, the beam needs a catalyst. A key. Something that resonates on both the mortal and divine frequencies. He walked over to Kestrel, his expression one of patient revelation, the professor explaining the final, beautiful twist in his thesis. The Warden's aura, when amplified by the pillars and pushed to its absolute peak, is that key. He is the only being in existence who can focus the beam. We don't need to capture him. We don't need to defeat him. He turned to the main view screen, a chilling, serene confidence on his face. We just need him to come to us. We need him to fight his way to the heart of this fortress, to stand before the cannon, and to unleash his full power in a final, desperate act of heroism. He smiled, a sad, knowing smile of a man who saw the end of history and his place in it. Let him come. He is the bullet in my gun. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Sky-High Siege. The psychic vision shattered, leaving them standing on the frozen shore of Lake Valor, gasping as if they'd been physically struck. The image of the god machine, the colossal cannon aimed at the heart of reality, was seared into their minds. The scale of Valerius's ambition was no longer theoretical, it was a tangible, floating mountain of steel and stolen divinity. Hope, for a moment, seemed like a distant, childish memory. They were 5 trainers and a handful of Pokemon against a flying fortress that could hold a city, a weapon that could unmake their world. How? Iris's voice was a ragged whisper, her usual fire banked to a cold, hard ember of despair. How can we possibly fight that? We can't even reach it. There has to be a way, Ash said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. He was staring at the sky, at the vast, empty blue where he knew the Aegis was hiding, cloaked and silent. For the first time, he felt the true, crushing weight of the title, Warden. He was the guardian of a seal he couldn't see, against an enemy he couldn't reach. It was Azulf who answered. The being of valor, having shown them the face of their foe, now flared with a defiant, brilliant light. Less than you are not grounded, Warden. You are a part of this world. Its winds, its seas, its skies. You are connected to it all. You have only to call. Greater than. Azulf's words were not a suggestion, they were an instruction. A key. Call. Call who? He looked at Latius, whose own form was shimmering with a newfound understanding. She met his gaze and nodded, a silent affirmation. The bond could be more than a link between them, it could be a beacon. Ash closed his eyes, shutting out the sight of their impossible task. He focused inward, on the calm center of his own aura. He reached out through the bond, not just to the 4 pillars beside him, but further. He pushed his consciousness, his will, his desperate plea, outwards. He didn't send words. He sent a feeling. A clear, powerful projection of the threat, of the perversion of balance, of the cannon aimed at the heart of creation. He poured his own conviction into the call, his love for his Pokemon, his memories of all the people and places he'd fought to protect, his unshakable belief that this world was worth saving. Cynthia, Iris, B, and Latius felt his call resonating through them. Instinctively, they added their own strength to it. Cynthia's clear, analytical understanding of the cosmic stakes. Iris's raw, untamed love for the natural world. B's unyielding, disciplined will to fight for order against chaos. Latius's pure, soulful connection to the other legendary beings. Their 5 distinct energies, amplified by Azulf's valorous aura, braided together into a single, powerful signal. It shot upwards from the frozen lake, a silent, psychic scream that pierced the heavens, a desperate SOS sent to the very guardians of the sky. For a long minute, nothing happened. The only sound was the wind whistling over the ice. Doubt began to creep in. Then, the sky changed. High above, a pinprick of brilliant green light appeared. It grew rapidly, descending at an impossible speed. The air itself began to vibrate with a deep, resonant hum, a sound of immense, ancient power. A sonic boom, delayed by the incredible velocity, finally hit them, a thunderclap from a clear sky that cracked the ice on the lake. The shape resolved itself. A long, serpentine body of brilliant emerald green, marked with yellow, glowing rings. A colossal, draconic head with piercing yellow eyes that held the wisdom of eons. It was a being that lived in the ozone layer, the eternal mediator between the masters of land and sea. Rayquaza. The sky-high Pokémon leveled out its descent 1,000 feet above them, circling the lake in a majestic, terrifying display. It was larger than any of them had imagined, a living mountain range of muscle and celestial energy. It wasn't an ally to be commanded, it was a primordial force of nature they had just woken up. Its voice was not a thought, but a sound that seemed to shake the atoms in their bodies, a roar that was part hurricane, part earthquake. It looked down at the 5 small figures and the tiny blue being of valor, its gaze seeming to weigh their very souls. Ash stepped forward, unafraid. He met its gaze and held up not a weapon, but an image in his mind, the vision Azulf had shown them. The Aegis. The cannon. The 2 captive legendaries. Rayquaza fell silent. It saw the truth in the projection. It saw the unnatural machine, the caged gods, the profound violation of the world's balance it was sworn to protect. Its yellow eyes narrowed, and the low, rumbling hum in its body intensified, its ancient rage slowly beginning to build. It lowered its massive head until its snout was mere yards from the group, the wind from its breath a gale force. It looked at Ash, the small human who had dared to summon it. Then, it gave a slow, deliberate nod. It would help. It can't carry all of us, Cynthia said, stating the obvious logistical problem. It doesn't have to, Ash replied. He looked at Iris and Latius. You two know what to do. Iris recalled her Dragonite and climbed onto Latius's back, holding on tight. Rayquaza lowered its massive body, allowing Ash, Cynthia, B, and their primary Pokémon to clamber onto a relatively flat section behind its great head. The scales were the size of dinner plates, hard as diamond, but warm with a latent inner energy. With another earth-shaking roar, Rayquaza ascended. The world fell away beneath them with breathtaking speed. They punched through the cloud layer into the clear, cold stratosphere. The sky here was a deep, dark indigo, the curve of the planet a visible, brilliant blue and white arc below them. For a moment, they were all caught in the sheer, overwhelming majesty of it. The wind was a roaring symphony, the feeling of riding a living god of the sky was intoxicating. It was a brief respite, a moment of profound beauty before the coming storm. The storm found them soon enough. As they reached the upper atmosphere, the Aegis materialized before them. It decloaked, shimmering into existence like a phantom island in the sky, its sheer scale blocking out the stars. Immediately, gunports slid open, and swarms of the insect-like drones poured out, a cloud of black metal that swarmed towards them. They know we're here, Cynthia yelled over the wind. Rayquaza didn't need a command. It opened its great maw and unleashed a torrent of emerald energy, a dragon pulse of such magnitude it looked like a river of stars. The beam tore through the drone swarm, vaporizing dozens in an instant. Our turn, Iris shouted. Latius peeled off from Rayquaza's side, her sleek form a blur of red and white. She and Iris became a fighter jet escort, Latius's luster purge attacks, waves of blinding psychic light, disabling the drones. Sensors while Iris's Haxorus, released in midair and clinging to Latius, fired its own dragon pulses into the confused swarms. It was a chaotic, three-dimensional ballet of destruction. Null energy blasts from the fortress's turrets streaked past them, only to be met by Rayquaza's overwhelming power. Drones swarmed, only to be picked off by the fast-moving Latias and Haxorus. "We can't fight a prolonged battle out here," Ash yelled, clinging on as Rayquaza barrel rolled to avoid a volley of heavy cannon fire. "We need to get inside. Rayquaza, get us to the hull. We need an opening." Rayquaza seemed to understand. It ignored the smaller drones, its ancient eyes fixed on the fortress itself. It coiled its massive body and then shot forward, a living torpedo of divine fury. It built up a charge in its mouth, a blinding white light that seemed to swallow the very darkness of space. Hyper beam. The blast that erupted was not a beam, it was a cataclysm. It struck the upper plating of the Aegis fortress, and for a moment, the world was white. The energy melted through layers of reinforced alloy, blasting a jagged, gaping hole in the fortress's skin, sparks and molten metal flying into the void. "That's our door. Go. Now," Ash commanded. Rayquaza banked hard, flying parallel to the hull. As they passed over the glowing, molten hole, Ash, Cynthia, and Bee leapt. They landed hard on the metal decking inside, their Pokémon materializing beside them, ready for a fight. Latias, carrying Iris, zipped through the opening a second later, landing gracefully. Rayquaza let out one final, triumphant roar that shook the entire fortress to its foundations. Its task was done. It had delivered them to the heart of the enemy. It ascended back into the heavens, a guardian returning to its post, leaving them alone in the belly of the beast. They were in a vast hangar bay. Emergency lights bathed the area in a stark red glow. Alarms blared. Aegis soldiers were already scrambling, taking up defensive positions. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and deep in enemy territory. It was a perfect moment. "Okay," Ash said, his voice calm and steady amidst the chaos. "This is it. We know the plan." He turned to Cynthia. "The power core. Free Yuxi and Mesprit. Shut this thing down from the inside." Then he looked at Iris and Bee, a flicker of a grin on his face. "You two get to have some fun. Find that cannon. Turn it into a pile of scrap metal." Finally, he looked at Latias, who had transformed back into Bianca. "We're heading for the bridge. We're going to have a little talk with the director." They stood there for a heartbeat, a small, defiant island in a sea of rising hostility. The bond between them was no longer a confusing mess of whispers and emotions, it was a clear, humming network of shared resolve. They were ready. Before they broke formation, Ash met each of their eyes. He gave Iris a look that was both a challenge and a vote of confidence. "Try not to break the whole ship." She grinned back, a feral, beautiful thing. "No promises." He turned to Bee. Their eyes locked, and no words were necessary. They were warriors heading into the fray. He saw her silent acknowledgement, the profound respect she now held for him. He gave a single, firm nod, and she returned it. It was more than enough. His gaze lingered on Cynthia, seeing the storm of doubt and responsibility still churning behind her calm facade. "Find the truth, Cynthia," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Don't let it break you." A flicker of warmth, of gratitude, touched her eyes. She straightened, the champion of Sinnoh once more, her resolve hardened to steel. "I won't. Let's move," Ash commanded. And as one, they broke, 5 streaks of purpose vanishing into 3 different corridors of the flying fortress. The siege had begun. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Heart of the Aegis. The corridors of the Aegis were a sterile, white labyrinth, punctuated by the blare of alarms and the frantic, organized chaos of its defenders. The fortress was a living thing, and they were the virus its immune system was scrambling to destroy. But the virus was potent, and it had a purpose. They moved with a speed and synergy that defied the soldiers, rigid formations, the silent communication of the bond turning them into a 5-headed hydra, striking in 3 directions at once. Cynthia's path was one of intellect, not brute force. With her Garchomp moving like a silent, land-based shark beside her, she bypassed firefights, using her knowledge of structural engineering, gleaned from a dozen architectural texts, to navigate the fortress's substructures. She sought the path of least resistance, following the massive, humming power conduits that pulsed with stolen divine energy. They were the arteries, and she was following them to the heart. She found it in a vast, spherical chamber that hummed with a bone-deep, sorrowful energy. In the center, suspended in their crackling containment fields, were Yuxi and Mesprit. Their light was faint, their forms flickering like dying candles. Their combined psychic anguish was a palpable wave of misery that made the air thick and hard to breathe. "We're here," she whispered, her hand resting on Garchomp's rough hide. The sight of the two caged beings solidified her resolve. This was a crime against nature, against life itself. Whatever Valerius's logic, this was undeniably wrong. She and Garchomp began their assault, not on the fields themselves, but on the power regulators feeding them. A single dragon claw tore a console from the wall, sending a shower of sparks into the air. But as the console fell, a hidden holographic projector activated. Valerius's face appeared before her, not the live feed from the bridge, but a recording. His expression was not triumphant, but somber, academic. "Champion Cynthia," the recording began, his voice calm and sorrowful. "I knew if anyone could reach the heart of my work, it would be you. I am not a monster. I am a student of history. The same history you have so diligently studied. But I have access to the chapters that were torn out of the book." The image shifted. It was no longer Valerius, but a scene from a forgotten age. It depicted a civilization of breathtaking advancement. Humans and Pokemon lived in gleaming cities that touched the clouds, their technology seemingly powered by a harmonious understanding of aura and nature. It was a utopia. This was the world, 10,000 years ago, Valerius's voice narrated. Humanity had achieved a state of near perfection. We were on the cusp of becoming true partners with the world, not its subjects. The scene soured. The sky in the recording tore open, and a being of pure, blinding light descended. Arceus. But this was not a benevolent creator. Its eyes were cold, its presence one of absolute, terrifying judgment. It raised its head, and 1,000 beams of light rained down upon the utopia, erasing it from existence in a silent, searing apocalypse. The recording showed cities turning to glass, then to dust. It showed people and Pokemon dissolving into motes of light, their technological marvels annihilated. "Our crime." Valerius's voice was a low, bitter whisper. "We had grown too powerful. We had learned to manipulate the fabric of reality in ways that rivaled the gods. And for that, we were purged. Judged and erased, lest we challenge the divine monopoly on power." The image shifted back to Valerius's face. The founders of the Aegis Foundation were the few who survived that purge, hidden in shielded bunkers, passing down the truth for 100 generations. "We are not conquerors, champion. We are survivors, ensuring that humanity is never again so helpless. We are building a shield for our entire species." The recording ended. Cynthia stared at the empty space where it had been, the hum of the power core a mocking drone in the sudden silence. Her breath caught in her throat. Her entire worldview, her faith in the legends, in the divine order she had dedicated her life to protecting, shattered into a million pieces. The truth she had sought had not set her free. It had utterly and completely broken her. Was she fighting to save her gods, or was she fighting to preserve the memory of her world's executioners? Iris and Bee's path was paved with violence. They were a whirlwind of controlled chaos, a two-woman army carving a path of destruction straight towards the colossal energy signature of the Arceus catcher. Iris's Haxorus was a living battering ram, smashing through bulkheads, while Bee and her Grapplock moved through firefights with a deadly, disabling grace, their every blow precise and final. They found the cannon in a chamber so vast it had its own weather system. The weapon was even more monstrous up close, a spine of gleaming metal and pulsating energy conduits that stretched for nearly a mile, aimed at the shimmering dimensional rift projected at the far end of the bay. The air crackled with raw, untamed power. And guarding it was Commander Kestrel. She stood alone on a raised platform, her tech-infused Metagross floating silently beside her, its purple energy lines glowing ominously. "I knew you would come," Kestrel said, her voice echoing in the massive chamber. "The brute force of the group. Predictable. The only thing you can predict is how badly we're going to break your toys," Iris snarled, her Haxorus roaring in agreement. "Another battle is pointless," Kestrel stated, her tone shifting. It was not a challenge, but an appeal. "You are warriors. True masters of your craft. Can't you see the logic in our position? Why would you pledge your strength to chaotic, unpredictable beings who would just as soon destroy you as look at you? Director Valerius offers a world of order. of stability. A world led by the strength of humanity, not the whims of gods. A world where warriors like you would be respected, not held in check by ancient fears. We choose our own gods, Bee said, her voice ringing with a clarity that cut through Kestrel's rhetoric. She stepped forward, settling into a low fighting stance. And we choose our own battles. So be it, Kestrel sighed, a flicker of genuine regret in her eyes. Metagross, overclock sequence. Engage and terminate. The battle was brutal. It was two of the world's strongest trainers against one, but that one was empowered by technology that defied the laws of Pokemon battles. Metagross moved with unnatural speed, its psychic attacks amplified to a terrifying degree. But Iris and Bee were a perfect storm of instinct and discipline. Iris and Haxorus were the raging offense, their outrage attacks forcing Metagross back, their sheer ferocity keeping Kestrel on the defensive. Bee and Grapploct were the unshakable defense and cunning counterattack. Graploct's tentacles became a shield, deflecting psycho cuts, while Bee directed it to attack Metagross's joints and sensor arrays, systematically dismantling the machine from the inside out. Through the bond, they felt each other's rhythm. Iris would feel Bee's intent to strike at the left flank and would adjust Haxorus's charge to create the perfect opening. Bee would sense the peak of Iris's rage and have Grapploct lock down Metagross's legs a second before a devastating Dragon Pulse hit. Finally, Haxorus, in a blaze of draconic fury, shattered Metagross's augmented armor with a final, desperate Giga Impact. At the same moment, Grapploct ensnared the Pokemon in a crushing Octolock. Metagross powered down, defeated. Kestrel fell to her knees, her partner's defeat her own. She looked up at the two victorious women, panting but unbroken. She saw no hesitation in their eyes, no doubt. Just pure, unyielding conviction. He's trying to save humanity. Kestrel pleaded, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to make them understand. The gods are monsters. Iris walked past her, her eyes fixed on the cannon. Maybe, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. But at least they're our monsters. Bee was already at the cannon's base, her hands glowing with fighting energy as she placed a series of charges on its main power conduit. The warrior had made her choice. She would trust the warden. Ash and Latias, now Bianca, reached the bridge. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a scene of profound, unnerving calm. There were no guards, no alarms, just Director Valerius, standing with his back to them, looking out of the massive viewport at the curve of the planet below. Warden, Pillar of Soul, he said without turning. Welcome. You have made excellent time. Please, come in. Ash and Bianca stepped onto the bridge, Pikachu sparking with tension on Ash's shoulder. The room was cold, minimalist, and silent. A large timer was projected in the air beside Valerius, ominously counting down from 5 minutes. It's over, Valerius, Ash said, his voice steady. My team is disabling your weapon and freeing the legendaries as we speak. Are they? Valerius asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. He finally turned, and his face held not fear or anger, but a look of sad, paternal disappointment. Oh, I don't think so. I think your pillar of mind is currently facing a truth that has shattered her, and your pillars of body and instinct are exactly where I need them to be, causing a massive power surge as they attempt to overload the cannon's systems. He gestured to a secondary screen, showing Cynthia frozen in the core chamber and Iris and Bee setting their charges. You see, Warden, Valerius continued, walking calmly towards him, you've been operating under a misapprehension. You think you've been fighting my plan. In reality, you've been the most crucial part of it. He smiled his reasonable, charismatic smile. The cannon is active. The timer is not a countdown to its firing, but to the final alignment of the dimensional anchor. It will fire when it reaches 0, regardless of what you do. He stopped just a few feet from Ash. He didn't summon a Pokemon. He didn't raise a weapon. He just talked. Humanity must be free. As long as the gods exist, we are children, living in a house with careless, omnipotent parents. It is time for us to burn that house down and build our own. The timer on the screen hit 0. A deep, powerful hum resonated through the entire fortress. The lights on the bridge dimmed as all power was routed to the Arceus catcher. You're too late, Valerius said softly. A wave of despair hit Ash from the bond. He felt Cynthia's shattered faith, Iris and B's frantic realization that their charges hadn't disabled the weapon but had instead supercharged it. He had failed. The cannon is aimed, Valerius smiled sadly, looking out the viewport. And I'm not firing at Arceus. He pointed. I'm firing at the true prison. Ash's eyes followed his finger. He had assumed the shimmering rift was a gateway. But looking at it now, with Valerius's words echoing in his ears, he saw it differently. It didn't look like a door. It looked like a lock. Like a seal. From the heart of the Aegis, a beam of pure, annihilating black and purple energy, the stolen essence of mind and emotion, focused by a perversion of sacred architecture, and catalyzed by the storm of heroic energy Ash and his team had brought to the fortress, shot across the void. It struck the seal at the spear pillar. And the universe screamed. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Warden and His Pillars. The beam of pure, weaponized absence struck the seal, and reality fractured. It was not a sound one could hear with their ears, but a chord of wrongness that resonated in the soul. On the bridge of the Aegis, the viewport didn't just show the impact. It buckled, the reinforced transparent alloy warping as if space itself was bending around the fortress. A wave of psychic static washed over them, and for a horrifying second, Ash felt the bond connecting him to the others stretch thin, threatening to snap under the sheer cosmic strain. In the core, Cynthia cried out, falling to her knees as the raw, unfiltered data of a breaking dimension flooded her senses. In the cannon bay, Iris and B felt a lurch in their gut, the fundamental laws of physics groaning under a pressure they were never meant to withstand. The target point at the spear pillar did not explode. It did not implode. It tore. A jagged, bleeding wound of absolute blackness appeared in the fabric of space, a tear that did not lead to the serene golden light of the Hall of Origin, but to a place of utter, chaotic emptiness. It was a prison door, blasted off its hinges. On the bridge, Valerius watched, his face a mask of triumphant, historical vindication. You see, he whispered, his voice trembling with the fervor of a prophet whose scripture had just been proven true. Freedom. A world of our own. His words died in his throat. From the tear, something poured out. Not a being, but an essence. A tide of shadows and antimatter, a wave of physics that were the inverse of their own. The Aegis fortress, the pinnacle of his logic and technology, groaned in protest as its hull was touched by this alien energy. Panels sparked, systems failed, and the artificial gravity flickered violently. What is this? Valerius breathed, his confidence shattering like glass. This is not what the texts described. This is not severance. This is an opening. His logic, his perfect calculations, his entire life's work had been based on a fundamental misinterpretation. He hadn't bought a key to lock a door. He had used a sledgehammer on a pressure valve, and now the contents were venting into their reality with explosive, vengeful force. And then, from the heart of the black wound, something vast and terrible emerged. It was a creature of impossible geometry, a serpentine being of shadow and platinum, with 6 great, ghostly tendrils that seemed to drift in and out of existence. Its red eyes burned with the cold fire of a billion years of solitary fury. It was Giratina, the renegade god, master of the distortion world, and it had just been violently awakened from its eons of slumber by having its front door blown in. It let out a silent, psychic roar that dwarfed the scream of the breaking universe. It was a roar of pure, undiluted rage at the violation of its realm, and it was directed at the closest, most arrogant piece of reality it could find, the Aegis fortress. One of its shadowy tendrils lashed out. It moved not through space, but by bending space around it, and it struck the fortress's lower section. A third of the flying city, miles of metal and technology, simply ceased to be. Not vaporized, not destroyed, but erased, dragged into the chaotic anti-reality of the distortion world. The Aegis tilted violently, its structural integrity failing. Valerius stumbled and fell, his face ashen, the face of a man who had stared into the eyes of his own beautiful theory and seen it become a monster. All of his logic, all of his reason, had just been rendered utterly meaningless by a power he had not only failed to account for, but had personally unleashed. He started to laugh, a broken, empty sound of a mind that had snapped. It's beautiful, he wheezed, staring at the chaos. It's so illogical. Just as a collapsing bulkhead threatened to crush him, a figure landed on the bridge with a soft thud. It was Kestrel. She grabbed her fallen director, her face grim and set. We live, Director, she said, her voice a firm anchor in his sea of madness. We learn. She activated her personal teleporter, and they vanished in a flash of light, abandoning their dying fortress and the god of chaos they had just set loose upon the world. Ash and Latius were thrown across the bridge as the ship tore itself apart around them. Alarms screamed their final, futile warnings. Less than Ash. The core is critical. Cynthia is trying to get Yuxi and Mesprit free. Greater than Latius's voice was a frantic shout in his mind. Less than the cannons overloading. We're getting out. Greater than Iris's thought was a sharp, panicked burst. They had to get out. But they couldn't. Giratina was now turning its terrible, furious gaze upon them, the small beings at the heart of the machine that had desecrated its home. This was it. The real test. Not against a man with a flawed ideology, but against a god with a righteous fury. Everyone. Ash projected through the bond, his voice a clarion call of pure, unshakable will. To me. Now. He didn't know if they could make it. But he had to believe. Moments later, they burst onto the tilting, collapsing bridge. Cynthia, her Garchomp carrying the freed but still faint forms of Yuxi and Mesprit. Iris and Bee, bruised and covered in soot, their Pokémon emerging beside them. They had converged on his position, drawn by the command in his aura. They were together, a small, defiant island on the deck of a sinking ship, staring out the fractured viewport at an enraged god. We can't fight that thing. Iris yelled, stating the terrifyingly obvious. We don't have to beat it, Ash said, his voice cutting through the panic. We just have to make it listen. He looked at them, his team, his pillars. The bond between them was thrumming, a live wire of shared fear and adrenaline. It was time to use it. Not as a phone line, but as a power conduit. Give me your strength, he commanded. All of it. Trust me. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his hands, but with his soul. A brilliant blue aura exploded from his body, no longer a subtle shimmer but a blazing mantle of power. He felt the others hesitate for a split second, and then, one by one, they let go. He felt Cynthia's mind connect to his, not with doubt, but with a new, sharp clarity. Her golden aura flowed into his, a stream of pure intellect and strategy. He felt Iris's wild, untamed spirit, a raging violet fire of pure instinct, pour into the mix. He felt Bee's unyielding, disciplined will, an unshakable pillar of orange energy that grounded them all. And he felt Latius's pure, soulful empathy, a rose-gold river that connected their mortal hearts to the divine. Their 5 auras flowed into him, the warden, the nexus of their power. They braided together, swirling into a single, blinding column of pure white light that erupted from Ash and enveloped them all. Their Pokémon, caught in the radiance, roared as they felt a surge of power unlike anything they had ever known. They were no longer 5 separate beings. They were one. One mind, one will, one purpose. Less than Giratina. Greater than. Ash projected their combined consciousness, not as an attack, but as a message. A memory. They showed the enraged god everything. They showed it Valerius's speech, his twisted logic. They showed it their own confusion and anger. They showed it the battle for Lake Valor, their desperate fight to save Azulf. They showed it the cannon firing against their will, the breaking of the seal. They didn't plead for mercy. They showed it the truth. Less than we are not your enemy. We are the victims of the same foe. He broke your prison, but he also put our world in chains. Help us make this right. Greater than. Giratina paused. Its furious assault on the dying fortress slowed. It felt the truth in their projection, the raw sincerity of their plea. It saw the valor of Azulf, the mind of Yuxi, the emotion of Mesprit, all resonating within this strange, powerful gestalt of human and Pokémon. Its rage, born of violation, began to subside, replaced by a deep, ancient weariness. The Aegis gave a final, groaning shudder and then broke apart, its power core finally exploding in a silent, brilliant flash. But before the blast could consume them, one of Giratina's shadowy tendrils reached out. It wasn't an attack. It gently coiled around the small platform of the bridge they were standing on, shielding them from the explosion and lifting them into the silent void. They floated in space, protected by the very god they had been prepared to fight, watching the last remnants of the Aegis Foundation's ambition burn away into nothing. The tear in reality remained, a bleeding, black wound in the sky. Giratina could not fix it. Its power was of the distortion world. It could not mend the fabric of this one. The crisis had been averted, but the damage was not undone. It was then that a new light appeared. It was a light of pure, unequivocal creation. It shone from the Hall of Origin, through the very tear that Valerius had made, and it took form. 1,000 shimmering, ethereal arms unfolded, and in the center stood the alpha Pokemon. Arceus. It regarded the scene with eyes that held the birth and death of galaxies. It looked at the tear, at the weary Giratina, and at the small clutch of mortals and Pokemon floating in its grasp. A voice that was not a voice, but the very sound of existence, echoed in their unified mind. Less than the seal has been broken. And the warden has failed. Greater than. The pronouncement was a cold, hard fact. Ash felt a pang of failure, but it was quickly replaced by a defiant resolve. Less than and yet, the world still stands, greater than Arceus continued, its gaze lingering on the white aura that still connected them all. Less than the bond I created was a chain, meant to force cooperation. You have reforged it into a key. You have succeeded where my own design was flawed. You have not just guarded the balance. You have embodied it. Greater than. Arceus turned its attention to the tear. It raised its head, and a wave of pure, golden energy washed over the wound in space. The chaotic, bleeding edges of the rift softened, knitting themselves back together with threads of golden light. The laws of physics were reaffirmed. The prison was not rebuilt, but the door was mended, now a stable gateway between the worlds, to be crossed, not broken. With its task done, Arceus gave a final, lingering look at the 5 bonded souls. It was a look of acknowledgement. Of approval. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it was gone. The world reformed around them. One moment they were in the cold of space. The next, they were standing in the serene twilight of the Sinjo ruins, the cosmic nebula swirling gently above them. Yuxi, Mesprit, and Azulf, now fully recovered, floated in the center of the courtyard, chirping their gratitude before dissolving into light, returning to their mended lakes. The white aura that had bound them together receded, separating back into their individual selves. The connection was still there, but it was different. It was no longer a constant, invasive hum. It was quiet. A choice. They could open the link, or they could keep their own counsel. The chain was gone. All that remained was the path. For a long time, no one spoke. They simply breathed, absorbing the fact that they were alive, that the world was safe. For now. Cynthia was the first to break the silence. She looked at the spot where Arceus had been, her expression one of profound, weary wisdom. Aegis is still out there, she said, her voice quiet. Their logic is flawed, but their question, it's valid. What is humanity's place in a world with gods? We can't ignore that anymore. Who cares? Iris declared, though her voice lacked its usual fire, replaced by a new, deeper excitement. That was the best fight of my life. When's the next one? Bee didn't speak. She walked over to Ash's side, a silent, unshakable presence. On her face, for the very first time, was a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was a look of pure, warrior's respect. A look that said, I follow your lead. Latias, in her Bianca form, curled up on Ash's shoulder, a warm, comforting weight. Ash looked at the 3 powerful women, the strategist who now questioned everything, the warrior who had found her battle, the rival who had become his staunchest ally, and the soul of the legendary world who had chosen to stand with them. They were no longer his prize, no longer his burden. They were his team, his pillars. He looked up at the swirling, artificial sky of their sanctuary, the weight of his new responsibility settling not as a crown, but as a mantle he was finally ready to wear. We train, Ash said, his voice full of the quiet, magnetic confidence of a true warden. And we get ready. They're going to learn why you don't mess with the balance. Chapter 10 End.